Hey, this is one of the scariest forest stories I've ever told. If you've heard it before, trust me, it hits different tonight. Where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? Let me know in the comments. Now close your eyes, and don't forget the rules. Story when it rains in the woods. It's raining again. To be honest with you, I'm terrified of rain. I never leave the house when it's storming outside. But to give myself some credit, I never used to be like this. I used to love watching the rain fall from outside the windows, but now I always have my curtains pulled tight across the edges of the windowsill. I wish I could show you what made me the way I am, partly to warn you, partly to verify myself. But I can't. I can only write out my story like it's some sort of fantasy. As if it's just another bizarre story on the internet that deserves to be forgotten in a week. If you see it like that, then that's fine, but I won't forget. I'll never forget. In 2012, I was a 21-year-old college student. I was absolutely madly in love with nature and all things wild. I had spent my childhood roaming up and down tree lines fantasizing about mythical creatures and fantastic monsters. Now there I was in 2012 as an adult, studying forestry with dreams of defending those tree lines and fantasies I held so dear. I was absolutely ecstatic when my professor announced an opportunity for some extra credit. He suggested that we spend a few days of our upcoming break walking along some trails and paths to remind ourselves why we were doing what we were doing. As an avid hiker, I knew of a hiking trail a few hours over from our town that offered plenty of room to walk with very little crowding. The only ones who really walked more than a few minutes down the trail were the park rangers, and the chances of seeing one of them on the ever-winding and expanding trails of a forest seemed small. "Hey Lily, want to take a trip down to the preserve with me?" I asked as the bell finished tolling, signaling the end of the school day. The girl next to me, Lily, was a quiet and sweet girl. She had long brunette hair that stretched just past her shoulders and gentle green eyes. She was the type of person who people admired from afar. Beautiful but silent. A passing joke or compliment would make her smile, but she'd very rarely comment back. To most, that'd make them move on to the next person. To me, that made me want to be closer to her. We'd been friends for a while at this point. Whether or not any sort of romantic intent was had between us, I couldn't say. We just knew we connected on some sort of level. "Yeah, of course. Just tell me when." She looked into my eyes with a soft smile on her face. I smiled back at her. I hoped this trip would turn out well. A few days passed. Lily and I spent our free time in stores gathering food, supplies, and tents together. Soon enough, we were all packed up and ready to head out. We took my small car with our bags tied down on the roof and took the highway a few hours east. By the time we got there, it was mid-afternoon. Still plenty of time to walk, but also a bad time to find parking. There was plenty of people here walking their dogs, setting up lunches and walking the paths. "I thought you said it'd be quiet," Lily asked with a slight snicker. I rolled my eyes in response. "I'm sure these kids aren't planning on hiking a few days in. It'll get quiet, I promise." I spun around and began taking our large packs off of the roof of the vehicle. For as big as they were surprisingly easy to carry. Lily slipped the straps over her shoulders and waited for me to start heading towards the park. As we approached the trail's entrance, we saw a ranger loosely standing guard. "You guys heading in?" he asked. There was no hostility or caution in his tone. He was just merely asking a simple question. "Yeah, that's all right, right?" I questioned the fit middle-aged man. "Of course, just let me know your names and take my card. If you need anything, call down to the station. There's a couple ranger shacks deeper in. Feel free to use them if you need to, just make sure to clean up." The ranger gave a welcoming smile and handed me a small business card for the local ranger station. "Thank you." "Oh, and my name's Max. This is Lily." Lily gave a small nod at the ranger, and he nodded back respectfully. "Well, Max and Lily, you enjoy yourselves out there." We'll be patrolling around, so if you see us, don't be scared to say hi." With those words, the ranger backed away from the entrance and we began our trek. We spent half of the first day slowly walking in quiet appreciation. There's something so liberating about walking with no time limit. It's like all of the world's stress slides right off your back and the only thing you have to worry about is yourself. In that exact moment, you're all that matters. No bills, no studies, no cares. Just avoid snakes and strange plants and you're all set. It wasn't long into our journey before the sun began to nestle itself behind the trees and the warm, but steadily dropping, temperature of the late afternoon's winds began sweeping under our sweaty clothes. "Let's find a clearing to settle into," Lily said, her head tilting from one direction to the other looking for a place to set up. I nodded in approval and saw a small opening further down the path, clearly made by others who took a similar trip. It only took a few minutes to set up our tents in the clearing and to start a small fire. After all that walking and hard work, we were finally ready to be off our feet for a while. Lily plopped herself down on the opposite side of the fire I was sitting at and pulled out a granola bar to eat. I felt a rumble in my stomach and pulled out one of my own. "This place is really beautiful," she said, taking a large bite out of the bar. "Yeah, haven't seen many animals yet though." I unwrapped my food and placed it on my lips, ready to take a bite. I quickly glanced over at Lily and froze. In the increasingly darkening forest just off the trail, just behind Lily, was something about the size of half a football. It was cloaked in the darkness, but I assumed it had to have been some sort of small critter. I began to squint my eyes, trying to focus on it, but whatever it was seemed to fade out of existence, going straight into the ground. "Everything all right?" Lily asked. I realized it must have seemed like I was staring at her with food half in my mouth. I laughed and shrugged, shaking my head softly. "Yeah, sorry, I thought I saw an animal or something off in the woods. It was small, could have just been a rabbit or something. It must have burrowed into the ground though." My friend peered over her shoulder into the silent woods and looked around. I knew she wouldn't see anything, whatever it was left, as quickly as I caught sight of it. We ended up finishing our meal, extinguishing the fire and climbing into our separate tents. I slept like a log. All of that walking put me out like a light. It wasn't until the morning that I woke up. I stumbled out of the tent, nearly tripping on a small fabric ledge at the exit of my portable shelter. The hot and humid summer's morning sun hit me like a pile of bricks. "Just so you know, I think we need to watch out for snakes," Lily said softly while I was wiping my brow. I looked over at her to see her undoing the tent supports from the forest floor. "Did you see one?" I asked, bending down and following suit with the camp cleanup. "I think so. I heard something rubbing on the bottom of my tent last night." I opened my eyes and the indents on my walls looked like a pretty thick snake trying to wiggle its way in. She didn't seem bothered by the potential late-night visitor, so I kept her warning in my mind but continued on. As our journey went on, we realized that every step we took there was another blotch in the sky. Somehow a storm was brewing overhead that none of the forecasts we had watched warned us of. "How much longer until it rains?" Lily was interrupted by a large thunderclap nearby in the clouds. I felt the earth tremor below us before a few raindrops began falling from the dimly lit sky. "Thanks, Lily," I said, arching my head towards her direction. She scoffed and I laughed. The rain was little more than a small drizzle at that moment, but it was clear it was going to get worse. "Let's hurry and find a place to set up." I watched as she began to increase her pace, slowly moving from a walk into a jog, heading deeper down the trail. I followed suit right next to her. For a while it seemed like we weren't going to find a clearing anytime soon. We were already on the verge of being considered undoubtedly drenched, and to our luck, at that exact moment of thought, another strong explosion of thunder erupted from above. This time the floodgates were opened. Rain began to fall with a purpose and with enough force to erupt on impact, splashing everything nearby with the drop's watery contents. "Hey, right over there," I heard Lily yell out, just barely audible through the thunderous rain. She was running off of the main path down a small side trail nearby. I looked at where she was heading and saw a small cabin. I ran off the path with her. With each step, more and more mud thrust itself against my legs. I increased my speed, hoping to catch up to my light-footed friend, but something caught me off guard. The tip of my foot slid underneath something and my momentum carried me downwards, face first into a mud bath. For a few seconds I was dazed, just laying down in a running muck pit. I eventually looked down to my feet and saw what looked like a thin tree root also caked in dirt erupting out of the ground. But as my eyes kept on the root, those initial assumptions fell to the wayside. The shimmering of the mud is what made me realize that whatever this object was, it was moving just beneath the mud. Then it clicked in my head. The snakes Lily had brought up, I had just tripped over one of them. I felt a shiver cross over my back and I jolted back up to my feet and continued on my path, abandoning that snake behind. Without another incident, I made it to the cabin doors and busted inside, finally free from the hurricane-like storm. Wow! A familiar voice rang out in the shack. I looked over to see a drenched but otherwise clean Lily staring at me with an amused smile on her face. Decide to have a wrestling match out there. Huh, funny, I said, looking down at myself. Mud was dripping off of just about every pore of my body. I think I met one of your snakes you mentioned out there. It decided to give me a little trip. Oh really? Lily said as she grabbed me and turned me around, searching the pack on my back for something to help me clean up. You were right, they're pretty thick. I wonder what kind they are. I can't imagine them being venomous, being that wide. I felt the hands of my companion yanking out fabric from my pack. I took some time to look around the cabin as Lily pulled the towels free. It was wooden, old, and completely empty. There was a cooking stove off to one side, but other than that it looked very sparse. Clearly it was only meant for a quick one-night stay. Here, get yourself cleaned up. I turned back around and Lily handed me a bundle of towels. I immediately wiped off my face and brow. The dirt was already starting to dry and stick to my skin. Thanks, I replied to her as she began setting up her things. I put my pack down against the door and walked over to a window, still wiping myself down. I watched as the rain continued its assault on the earth, the dirt running like rivers down the valleys and trails, both natural and man-made. It looks terrible outside, I remarked. I heard a small groan of acknowledgement come from behind me. I let my eyes trail over the forested wetland over to the path we took to get up here. My body locked up when I saw something right where I tripped. Something was protruding from the ground like a small pillar. I rubbed the inside of the window fruitlessly to clear off the fog and obstructing rain. I could barely make out what looked like a thick, partially submerged branch broken off on one end with small twigs splintering off skyward. Hey, come and look at this. I called out to Lily, who was still fondling around with her bags. Is it the snake? She asked, rising to her feet. I don't think so. It looks weird though. I watched the mud-coated object get hammered by rain as Lily approached and peered outside. Is that a broken tree root? She suggested. I could only shrug. Whatever it was wasn't moving. Wait, Lily chimed in again. Look at the color. As more and more of the rain ran its way down the object, the less obstructed by mud the object became. I narrowed my eyes, pushing past the raindrops on the window, and noticed exactly what Lily was talking about. Whatever was under that mud was a pale shade of gray. Oh my God. Lily gasped and grabbed her mouth. What is it? I turned and looked at her, my eyebrow upturned in confusion. Look at the end of it, she said, holding her breath. I turned my gaze back outward and focused in. I felt my heart drop. Fingertips. It was an arm reaching out of the ground, still as the grave. Oh my God, my voice wavered slightly. We should call the rangers and get them out here. Where's their card? She asked, hand extended towards me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a wet but legible business card. Without hesitation, Lily snatched it out of my hand and began dialing the number in. Hello, I'd like to report something on one of the trails. She paced back and forth on the squeaky cabin floors. I turned and kept my gaze on the hand. It looked petrified in place, fingers eagerly reaching towards the sky, letting the water rush over it. We're at Dash, she began to stutter. We're at, I heard the voice on the other side of the phone chirp up and Lily nodded. Hey Max, can you take a step outside and tell me what number is next to the door? I peeled my eyes away from the hand. I felt an increasingly oppressive air pressing its way inside the cabin. I shook my intuition away and walked to the door. I opened it up and stepped outside. I peered towards the arm and could see it more clearly without the blurry window between us. It was hairless, smooth, and the fingernails seemed clean and trimmed. The water that gushed over it almost seemed to vanish on impact, as if it was some sort of sponge. I had to force my eyes away from it to view the number on the wall. 17. I took a deep breath, repeating the number in my head before the sound of a loud clap echoed off behind me. I jumped slightly on edge. I turned back towards the direction of the arm and saw nothing in its place. Just the mud quickly running down the trail. I swallowed hard and rushed back inside. The number is 17, but I think the arm fell back into the mud. It's not there anymore. Lily's eyes went wide as she relayed that information over to the dispatcher. It wasn't long until she pulled the phone away from her ear and hung up. They told us to stay put and that this storm's not going to pass anytime soon. They said they've got a ranger on the way and the police have been informed, but it might take them a while to reach us out here. I bit my lip and looked back outside towards the empty path. I hope it didn't get dragged away by the current. I mumbled. Lily came up right beside me, joining me at the window. I'm sure they'll be able to follow that mud slick down to wherever it goes. On the bright side, that rain cleaned you up a bit. She gave a reassuring smile and I looked down at myself. My clothes were still riddled with mud, but the rain on my skin seemed to have washed away most of the dirt. I guess that's always a plus. I said stoically, "Come on, Max, let's make ourselves at home at least. I'll just lock the door in case, well, you know." Her voice trailed off. "In case there's a killer out there." I mumbled at her as she walked over to the door and flipped the lock. She turned around and averted her eyes from my gaze, choosing instead to continue her mission of getting set up. After a few minutes of silence, we had our food laid out in front of us. We had agreed that once the ranger gets here, our little expedition was over. We had seen more than enough in just the past 2 days than we could have in a lifetime. Let's eat and try to get some sleep, I said, chowing down on some extra rations. Lily nodded and joined in on the feast. With full stomachs, we set up for bed. I noticed my friend kept looking out towards the darkened windows. I could feel tension in the air. "Everything all right?" I asked. Lily shook her head dismissively. "I just feel weird, like I'm being watched." "I'm sure it's nothing, but just to be safe, Dash." She ripped off her pillowcase and mine before walking over to the windows and draping them over the glass as makeshift curtains. "I just don't want anything looking in at us while we sleep." "I don't blame you." I made my way to my bedroll and caseless pillow before lying down, trying to get comfortable. Lily did the same. It was a few hours into the night before I heard Lily's hushed voice. Max, wake up, do you hear that?" I opened my eyes less groggy than I expected and met Lily's gaze. She was staring at the wooden door of the cabin. I spent a few seconds watching the door before I lightly saw the handle of the door jiggle. Someone was trying to get in. "What do we do?" Lily asked. I was speechless. Maybe it's the Dash. Our whispered conversation was interrupted by a loud knocking coming from the other side of the wooden door. Bang, bang, bang. I jumped to my feet. It's got to be the cops. I began my slow, meticulous walk to the door. Who's out there? Silence. Hello. I yelled again. Abruptly, the banging started again, loud enough to drown out my voice. I took a step back from the door and kneeled close to the ground. Each impact on the door rocked the wooden frames of the small cabin. I watched as one of the pillowcase curtains began to slowly slip off the window. No, Lily whispered, tears in her eyes. I rushed over to the window just as the fabric fell and was met face to face with the darkness outside. The banging on the door stopped suddenly. I very carefully kneeled down and grabbed the fabric in my hands to toss back over the window. Thud. Appearing out of the darkness was the palm of a hand. It slapped the window with a heavy force. I could only see the pale palm in the shroud of blackness outside. I quickly threw the pillowcase back on the window and backed up to Lily. She was shivering, her eyes wide with fear. That was the hand, Max. That was the hand that was outside earlier. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. I wrapped my arms around Lily for as much my comfort as hers. Thud. 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 The wet palm of the hand kept slapping against the glass. I could hear ripples of cracks spreading along the window pane. I squeezed onto Lily as she balled up and kept my eyes focused on the pillowcase covering the glass, hoping it wouldn't fall and expose that lifeless arm again. With one last thud, it stopped. A light shone through the fabric of the window mere seconds after the attack halted. I could hear the struggling sounds of wheels rolling up towards the cabin. I let out a sigh and a prayer that the Rangers had finally made it. With the sounds of the wheels stopping just a few yards away, I finally heard a voice call out from the void outside. Lily. Max. You in there? The voice sounded familiar. It was the Ranger from the day prior. I slid to my feet, dragging Lily with me. Yeah, we're inside, but someone's out there. I yelled. I rushed over to the door and opened it to see the Ranger standing stiff off in the middle of the small opening in front of the cabin. He was facing us, but the light from his rover coupled with his hat covered his body in intense shadows. His body seemed rigid. Come out of that box and we'll get you home. The Ranger said. His voice seemed different this time, disjointed from his body. I stayed quiet. Something was very wrong here. Step out of there. Now. The voice grumbled, unrecognizable from earlier. Are you all right? I called out a little more than a whisper. Of course I am. Can't you see my smile? The Ranger tilted his neck backwards. His hat slipped from his skull, which allowed the light from behind him to illuminate his face. His eyes were wide and full of both pain and fear. His lips were quivering in shock. I backed up more into the doorway and watched as two impossibly long fingers trailed their way from behind the Ranger's head and made their way across his cheeks to his mouth. They slid inside with little resistance and began pulling his lips outward in a mockingly gruesome smile. Then they kept prying. I watched as his lips strained with the force of the fingers inside of his mouth. His lips became white with the stress placed against them before a shower of red erupted from his mouth, parting the centers of his lips like sliced meat. I'm so perfectly happy. A voice called out from just behind the Ranger, its voice thick and unnatural. I looked for the source and froze. There, right next to the Ranger's feet, was a half-submerged human face dug deeply into the mud. Its black, cold eyes shone from some unknown source. Whatever this was a monster of the strictest definition. Its gaze was so vastly separated from humanity that there was no common ground between us. As I locked eyes with this thing, human in shape and deviled in eyes, I saw the Ranger fall into the mud. Just behind his head was a long spider-like arm stretching out of the ground, seemingly changing its size and shape as if it only faintly followed the laws of this reality. The ranger's body twitched and spasmed on the ground as more and more lifeless hands began to slither out from the mud, wrapping their hands around his body. I was so thirsty, but now I'm so very hungry. The submerged head called out unblinkingly towards me. Without another warning, the ranger's body was ripped under the earth and devoured by the mud. The ground where he was shifted and bubbled over like a small eruption. The creature's eyes stared at me with a deadening gaze. It was observing me. I let out a small chirp from my mouth. Without changing expression, the head effortlessly started gliding through the earth towards the cabin, fingers and arms popping out from the earth around it like fins from a shark. I had stored enough courage to slam the door shut and lock it before running back over to Lily, who saw the whole thing. "What is that?" she asked, her voice trembling. I shook my head and slumped down next to her. "I don't know." We sat in silence until the sounds of scratching came from below the floorboards. Hundreds of fingers tearing away flesh to the bone, trying to burrow their way upwards. All we could do was sit in the corner furthest away from the windows and pray they didn't get to us. That night we watched as the floors pulsated upwards and downwards as the foundation began to crumble. Those bombs were going to drag us and our wooden coffin downwards into the earth. I didn't know what to do. I sat there as the floor cracked open and mud crept up through the seams of the boards like blood flowing from a vein. I sat waiting to die, but Lily had other plans. She grabbed my hand and yanked me at my feet. She stared at the door for a split second before sprinting off with me in tow. She bursted open the door and ran towards the ranger's vehicle. Luckily for us, the ranger never shut it off before the earth took him down. We both hopped on its seat and zipped off the path back from where we came. I hazarded a glance back towards the cabin to see it crumbling into the ground, but there was something else there. Still half submerged on the path mere yards away from us was that unblinking head. Its black eyes shone dead set and emotionless on our escape. We kept driving and driving for God knows how long, until we hit some other rangers who were on a scouting mission up to us and their missing comrade. We told them everything we could, but the looks of disbelief said enough to us. We were labeled as emotionally distressed and unreliable witnesses. The powers that be listed the disappearance of the ranger and the cabin as accidental by case of mudslide. Now every time it rains, I wonder if somewhere out in the woods a single head peers out on the trails waiting for someone to pass by, a million hands waiting just below the surface to drag them down into the earth. Story 1. I'm a ranger for a circle of forest in the depths of the wilderness. I am tasked with one simple job: do not allow anything to escape. The circle of forest is just that. A circle. About 750 m in diameter. It's not particularly big. It is ringed by 2 meters of grassless rock, and then beyond that is the wilderness. Moss and fern and cliff and weeds. The trees and plants that grow inside the circle are thick and strange. It's raining this evening. I sit in my little hut with a mug of warm tea as the rain batters and clatters against the roof. It leaks through in one corner and drips quickly down into a bucket I placed there. My rifle rests against my leg. My hut has a direct view to the centerpiece of the forest. A dark, cave-like hole in the middle of a clearing, descending down and into the unknown. I tried to go through it once, but my head began to pound the deeper I went down. To the point of agony, actually, and I was forced to retreat. I don't go down there anymore. Not much point to it. My colleague joins me tonight. He sips from a mug of his own. "Ah," he says, with a pleasant smile. "Delicious. Nothing like a warm mug on a cold day." "Amichum," I reply, scratching my beard. "What do you think might be coming up tonight?" he asks. "Who could tell?" "Nothing. Hopefully." "It's been a while since the last one," he murmurs. "We're overdue a visitor." Yes, I suppose we are," I sigh. Visitor is darkly comical way to refer to the things that clamber out of the hole. coin because of how crushingly lonely it can get at this particular station. I've been here for 3 months now. Another 3 to go. But of course, I have Robbie here with me tonight. Someone to talk to. I've missed him. The rain splashes through the leaves and into the undergrowth, and I take a final sip before setting the mug down onto the wooden little table with a low thunk. I rise to my feet. Right. Let's head a little closer, shall we? Ugh, he mutters, glancing out the doorway. Into the rain. You know it, brother. He sighs. Fine. Are we splitting up or sticking together this time? It's a no-brainer. We'll stick together, I tell him. I clap him on the shoulder and gesture for the man to head outside. You know how I get lonely. He chuckles. Right you are, man. And out he goes, rifle in hand. I hoist up my own and out I go, the water splashing against my hood and my shoulders as we push through the undergrowth and a little closer towards the hole. The reason for this little pursuit outdoors is the rain itself. It is, unfortunately, obscuring our view, and whilst on a clear day I might be content to just sit in a hut and wait for one of the sensors to trigger, I also don't fully trust the sensor's effectiveness in such weather. So out we go. The ferns brush up against my camel-clad legs as we approach the clearing, and we take our positions beside the best lookout trees. Robbie is a little off, though. Hey, I say to him, above the rush of the rain. He looks at me. Wake up, man, you can be seen from there. Back up a little. He chuckles and rubs his head. Of course. Right you are. We settle down and we wait, and we watch, as water pools and puddles around the hole in the ground ahead. It's surrounded by tumbled rock and stone, though I couldn't say where from. There isn't another rock of such size in the whole circle of forest. Perhaps someone moved them there long, long ago. It's another 20 minutes before anything stirs from the hole. Robbie and I just spend the time shooting the shit. I just think you'd be so much happier if you quit this business, man, Robbie says to me. Being isolated for such long periods of time. It's not healthy. How long you got left? 3 months, I tell him. So 6 months total. Half a year in such a place as this, Robbie shakes his head. You need to be around people. Humans are social creatures. Perhaps, I grunt. Robbie opens his mouth to say more, but I cut him off with a quick gesture, pointing to the hole. We both creep a little lower in our positions and watch as a shadow begins to shamble its way from the depths of the hole. The thing is covered in slime and chatters as it appears. Armored, brown, and disgusting. 2 tiny, beady eyes peer out as its antennae twitch and circle around. Its rows upon rows of sharp blades clatter over the rock and slice down into the wet grass and the mud. I feel a swell of revulsion rise up in my stomach, but it's okay. These types are always the easiest. I raise my rifle, Robbie does likewise, and the abomination is riddled with quick holes, its shell and flesh bursting out into the undergrowth as it screeches in fury. I suppress a gag. Disgusting, Robbie mutters. Where the hell do these things even come from? I don't bother responding. It's a question we've asked each other countless times over the years. I have my theories. From amidst the ruin of the centipede-like creature, and out from the hole, comes a deer. It raises its head and sniffs the air. I raise the rifle, and the deer bolts, bouncing and speeding away over the undergrowth. Fuck. I shout, hesitating as I look between the deer and my colleague. I point at him. Watch the damned hole. I'll be back. Yeah, chance would be a fine thing. But the deer is the priority for now. I take off between the trees after it. I raise the gun and fire, exploding a branch as I do so. The deer still hops speedily away. They aren't usually this fast, these things. I stumble after it, leaping over ferns and bushes, and the deer makes the mistake of turning sideways to try and AC away from me. I take the opportunity to raise the rifle to my shoulder, firing again, with a better chance of hitting, and this time I strike. Black fluid bursts from the deer's side in a strangled, decidedly non-deer-like noises escapes its throat as it crashes down to the ground with a rustle of ferns. I wipe the rain and sweat from my forehead and turn instantly back, chest rising and falling as I hastily return to the clearing. I approach from the opposite side this time, and I raise a hand to Robbie, but, just as I expected, the man isn't looking. His interest is elsewhere, staring off into the woods. He rises to his feet. "Robbie." I shout at him, and he swivels to look at me. "Were you watching the hole?" The man does not respond, and movement at the clearing's edge catches both our attentions. An anxious-looking man with a backpack and waterproof trousers shuffles out from between the trees, a crumpled map in one hand. Hello," he says, looking between Robbie and I. I raise my rifle at once, and Robbie does likewise. I begin making my way around the clearing's edge towards my colleague, barrel of the weapon fixed carefully on the stranger. "Wah, hey," he says in alarm, putting up his hands. "I don't understand. You guys are rangers, right?" I'm not a poacher, or anything like that," he forces out an awkward laugh. "I'm just lost, honestly. Literally. I'm literally lost." "Where are you from?" I ask him. I'm sorry," the man replies, adjusting his glasses. I didn't realize I had an accent. A poor attempt at a joke. Another weak laugh. "Tell me where you're from right now or I'll blow your head off," I tell the stranger plainly as I reach my position beside Robbie. "Speak clearly." I'm from Aldebrand," the man mutters. "What?" I reply, jerking the rifle. I said speak clearly. "Aldebrand," the man replies, raising his voice, the terror in his face quite evident. "That isn't a real place," I tell him. "What country?" I don't dash. "What damned country?" "This country, obviously." "Please, this isn't funny, just let me go, all right? I'll find my own way. Please." I exchange a look with Robbie. "Tell me the name of any country, hiker. That's all I want to know." The man shakes where he stands as the rain pours down through the trees. He stutters and mutters, and eventually he manages to speak, though his words are a string of nonsense. I take quick aim and pull the trigger, and a hole appears in the center of the man's forehead. He drops like a brick as black fluid bursts and spurts from his face. His skin twitching and crawling as a massive, insect-like leg bursts from his ribcage. I spit onto the ground. "Jesus," Robbie murmurs. I consider chiding the man for allowing the creature through, but there's no point, really. So I let it go. The corpse twitches in the grass beneath the rain. "Aldebrand," Robbie repeats. "Do you think it's a real place? Or did he just make it up? A random combination of sounds?" "Who can say, man?" I reply, shrugging. "Your guess is as good as mine." Robbie says nothing further. We sit side by side and watch the hole for another 30 minutes. We are quieter this time, but still, it's nice just to have his company. The rain falls. "I gotta take a piss, man," Robbie says, breaking the silence. He clambers to his feet. "Hey, well, don't go too far. Just piss right there. I need you alert and active, my man. Just piss right there." Robbie hesitates and gives me a look before shaking his head. "All right, man. I'll try not to turn around too fast. Wouldn't want to hit you with my dick and knock you out." I chuckle as he relieves himself against the tree, a chuckle which is quickly lost as a horde of shadowy beings begins scampering out of the hole. Action, Robbie. I tell him, quick, stay alert. The shadowy beings quickly take shape through the rain. They are all exact copies of myself. They don't make a break for the exit, they run to me. Fuck. Soldier, one of the copies shouts into my face, grabbing me by the shoulders. Jesus, thank God. You're alive. Right, come with us, immediately. There's still time to get you to safety. I shove him away and raise the rifle. My copy stares at the barrel, then at me, and then swears and throws out his hands. Again. For fuck's sake. Why does he keep doing this? He turns to another of my copies and gives him a light shove in the chest. Why won't he just come back? What are we doing wrong? I choose not to partake in this little piece of theater. I take aim and fire, bursting a hole in my copy's neck. Initially, the blood is red, which is rather worrying, but it quickly runs black as he falls gasping to the floor. The other copies of myself all retreat in panic. There are 5 more of them. Robbie, one of them shouts, gesturing to my colleague. Tell him to come back already. We can't keep doing this. Robbie stutters and mutters, and I fire. The copy's head bursts open. Down he goes. 2 of the surviving copies attempt a hasty escape. Back to the hole, which I find interesting, but not interesting enough to spare them. Down they go, one after the other. Bang. Bang. 2 left now. They look at each other, and the closest holds out a hand to me. Listen, he says carefully as I reload. I know this seems impossible and scary dash. He's right. I'm fucking terrified, though I'm doing my best not to show it. These things really are getting creative. But you have to trust us on this. Or at least hear us out, please. Do you have any idea how long you've been gone? The other copy shouts in anger. He's not going to listen. It's just like last time. The closest copy stares right into my eyes. I don't care what the others say, he tells me. I will never leave you behind. I swore it once, and it's a promise I intend to dash. Bang. I blow the imposter to kingdom come. His comrade panics and slips on the wet grass as he tries to run, and I gun him down. His lifeless body thuds to the ground, his skin twitching in various and unsettling places, as if being pressed or stretched from the inside. I put a couple of bonus bullets in him for good measure. Robbie looks over to me and studies my face. Are you good, man? He asks after a moment. Yeah, I reply, lying. Yep. I stare at the faces of my copies. Corpses, now. I try not to dwell on it. I glance over to Robbie. Perhaps I've let this little charade go on for too long. Robbie pales and stares right past me at the hole. I turn to follow his gaze. 3 figures clamber out, one waving a white flag. Wait. One calls above the roar of the rain. I squint through it for a better look. Don't shoot. It's me, again. Another copy. Though this one is at least 2 decades older. A copy of Robbie is with him, similarly aged. A girl in her 30s walks with them, a fearful expression on her face and her hands raised. It's my daughter. A sick copy, at the least, and aged up like the others. I throw my hands out, exasperated. What do you want? Listen to me, you fool, my elder copy shouts back. This is the real me. The real you. And this is the real Robbie. The real Robbie. He puts a hand on a copy of Robbie's shoulder and his other on my daughter's. She stares at me, wide-eyed. "He looks so young," she says. She calls over. "Dad, it's me. Do you remember? Please tell me you remember. Remember the trip we took to the beach? You took us to the coast on my 10th birthday. We saw dolphins." She reaches up to her neck and lifts a necklace with a smooth little shiny pebble attached. "You let me keep this pebble. We had it turned into a necklace." "Things are about to change," my copy says to me, walking ever closer. "Things beyond your understanding, and the truths of this hole barely scratch the surface. It's a passage. I think you've realized this. A passage to places beyond and between. Sometimes to other planes, yes, but the tunnels run deep. They loop back around." He slams his hands to his chest. "I'm babbling. I appreciate that this might not make any sense to you, but we are from the same loop. The same path, looped back around." I take a deep breath. I look this madman in the eyes. With the scent of the rain-washed pine and the drift of rifle smoke in my nose, I take aim, and I fire. Bang! My so-called future self drops to the ground. My daughter screams, and the elder copy of Robbie drops to his knees at the corpse. "No. And no," he cries, and I take him out as well. The copy of my daughter is the hardest. Shaking where she stands, she turns to stare at me, defiant, daring me to shoot in cold silence. "It doesn't have to be this way," she says, her voice wavering. I chew my tongue, and then I call her bluff. Bang! Down she goes. Just another leaking corpse. Robbie stares at the ruined bodies. The trees rustle in the rain as the blasts of the rifle ring in our ears. He looks to me. "How do you do it?" he murmurs. "How the fuck do you it?" I rub a sleeve across my eyes. "Do not allow anything to escape," I tell him. "It's a rule for a reason." "You do it so easily," he says quietly, the disgust in his voice quite clear. "Is that what you think?" I ask him. I turn to face him, my jaw set as the rain leaks from my chin. "Tell me, Robbie. Tell me if what I am doing is wrong. Should I be letting these things and these abominations out into the world? And where do they come from, exactly? If where they're coming from is so great, then why leave it all? If there's something worse that's pushing them away, then that's all the more incentive to just keep shooting. I don't know which one of these horrors is the worst, so better safe than sorry." "What if they have something important to tell us?" he asks me. "Important? Fuck them. It's all tricks and lies. The second I let my guard down, I am lost. And, speaking of which," I raised the rifle and pointed at his head. He backs away. "Wait, hold on." He laughs anxiously, then stops when he realizes that I am not kidding around. "You've gone mad," he says simply. "You've lost yourself in your head. It's me. It's Robbie. If the things that come out of the ground are benevolent, then why do they all lie, Robbie? Why do they lie?" I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do, my friend." I cock the rifle. "I've enjoyed your company tonight, I really have. You were a strong imitation, I'll give you that. But you've missed a crucial piece of information. You always miss something. Robbie is dead. Long dead. Died 2 years ago. He died defending the people of this place from an abomination that rose out of that yonder hole. So I'll be seeing you now." Robbie's face contorts into shock and surprise. "Please dash," he begins, and I put a bullet through his forehead with a loud bang. He crumples. Down he goes. Just like the rest of them. That terrible black fluid pouring out and over the grass. Oversized, yet still only half-formed insect legs burst from his shoulders and neck, twitching in the rain. I lift my face to the sky and take a slow, deep breath. When Robbie first appeared to me this evening from through the trees, I was too surprised to react. It was a potentially fatal mistake, but for one reason or another the copy did not use his rifle to shoot me. If he was going to use it to kill me, he could have done so in that very first instant. He didn't. So after that, I just played along, keeping an eye on him. As I said, it gets real lonely up here, and I miss that man a great deal. The rain's letting up a little now. I watch as black sludge begins bubbling up from the hole's entrance, and I return to my hut, sitting down with a sigh in my chair as water drips from the branches and into the bucket beside me. The corpses will have melted away by morning. There won't be any more visitors tonight. The black sludge means that the tunnel needs time to recharge. I reach for my mug and take a slow sip of cold, miserable tea. 3 months down. 3 more to go. Before you close your eyes tonight, ask yourself one thing. What if the forest just beyond your town isn't sleeping when you are? What if it remembers you? What if it's been waiting? Welcome back. I am NightWhispers. I know many of you listen as you fall asleep, letting the darkness wrap around you. Before you drift off, leave a comment. Let me know where you're listening from. And if my stories haunt your dreams just right, you know what to do, like and subscribe. Now hush. It's time to listen. And whatever you do, don't follow the woman in white. Story 5. I am a forester, and I encountered something I can't explain in an old-growth forest. I am posting this because I am truly out of options. My employers refuse to take my reports, and have even threatened termination of my contract if I bring these events back to the table again. The local authorities are dismissive, or even worse, accuse me of substance abuse and mental instability. I can't even tell my own family, lest they draw the same conclusions. I wouldn't want to drag them into this anyway. Hopefully some of you people can help me, at least help me understand what is going on. I have worked as a forester in Appalachia for a logging company that will go unnamed for nearly a decade now. In that time I have come to love my job, the woods, and the freedom that accompanies both. But things have started to change with my most recent assignment. God, the woods used to feel so safe, so clean. Now I can't stop my hands from shaking when I stand beneath the green canopy. So we're all on the same page. I'll walk you through the fieldwork of my profession. First, the company assigns me a tract of land they have recently acquired. I do some less exciting prep work in the office, satellite imaging, GIS, property analysis, etc., and then I head out into the field. Generally, the sites are pretty far from the offices, requiring multiple-hour drives and overnight camping. I bring along some simple camping gear, tape measures, manual clinometer and altimeter, bright neon orange marking spray paint, and my GPS transmitter and marker, all in all a bunch of technical nonsense that lets me determine the value of trees, which should be logged, and which should be left behind to ensure no permanent damage is done to the forest. Simple enough. It was early morning on September 21st, 2019 when my office desktop pinged that I had an incoming email. Seeing that it was an assignment from corporate, I opened it up and nearly let out a cheer in my cubicle. The tract I had been assigned was a huge patch of old-growth forest located near the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. For those of you who don't know, an old-growth forest is a wooded area that has not been disturbed for hundreds of years, allowed to grow and develop in its natural state without intervention by farming, construction, or logging. Many old-growth forests haven't been touched since the settlers arrived, and some even before then. In any case, this was a cause for celebration. Old growth is increasingly rare and amazingly beautiful, and I was the one assigned to explore it. Of course, this was bittersweet, seeing as I would be the last to see it undespoiled before I gave the loggers the go-ahead. I spent the morning in the office packing my things and loading them into the tiny white Ford Ranger, lovingly nicknamed Piper, that the company had provided to me when I started working for them. She was a rugged little thing, having carried me through the mountains for almost a decade without protest. Of course, she wasn't without her quirks: crank-operated windows, a rattling tailgate, and an AC that hadn't functioned since 2011. But I loved that tiny little truck. Piper and I set out around noon, making good time on the 4 hours drive through the rugged depths of West Virginia. We arrived at the old trailhead that would deliver me to my track late into the afternoon. As I strapped my heavy backpack on and locked Piper up for her stay at the edge of the woods, I breathed deeply, taking in the heavy scent of forest earth and the sound of wind and birdsong through the treetops. Giving my truck a pat on the hood, I turned and made my way off the country road and onto the narrow dirt track that wound into the woods. The hike to the old growth stand of trees took about an hour of brisk trekking, the path becoming more and more overgrown as I progressed. It was obvious this trail hadn't been consistently used for years, probably decades. Nearly to my destination, I happened across what should have been the first sign that something was not right. An ancient sycamore tree stood in the dead center of the path. Had it been any other species, I would have sidestepped it and kept plugging ahead, but sycamores had always been my favorite trees, so I craned my neck upwards to admire the old beauty. About 12 feet off the ground, twisted and woven through a tangle of white-barked branches, was the decomposing skeleton of a deer, scraps of rotting fur and mummified tendons the only things holding the carcass together as it dangled from the tree. I gasped and stepped back from the initial shock, the staring skeletal visage of an old deer being the last thing I had expected to see. My first thought was that a mountain lion or similar predator had hauled the animal up there to feast upon. Carnivores like that were pretty rare in the area, but I had guessed it wasn't entirely out of the question. But my confusion spiked and the rumblings of dread gestated in my gut when I looked just a little bit closer. It was difficult to tell due to the distance from the forest floor and amount of time the deer had been up there, but as I squinted and stared, I noticed something haunting. The decrepit animal remains were not simply jumbled in the tree branches, they were lashed into place by scraps of rope and cloth. Someone had hauled that deer 12 feet up this sycamore tree and tied its limbs and joints so it would stay suspended up there. Directly beneath the nearly completely rotted animal, barely visible due to age, was carved a simple O, presumably slashed into the bark by whoever took the time to create this macabre installation. I was understandably shocked and confused by this discovery, but the apparent age of the carving and carcass eased my worries a little. Whoever had done this had obviously done their work months ago. I resolved that until I happened across fresher work, I was unlikely to run into anyone else out here in the woods. Having reassured myself for the moment and excited to lay eyes on rare old growth, I carried on down the trail towards my destination. I reached the edge of my assigned stand around 6:30 that night, the old ill-maintained trail terminating in a small clearing on the border of the forest I hiked through and the secluded acres of the old growth that waited beyond. I gazed awestruck at what waited for me, ancient gnarled tree trunks that soared stories high, capped with dense foliage that cast the groves beneath in placid twilight. One of the defining features of old growth is the lack of an understory, smaller plants choked of sunlight by the canopy above. This means that you can see much further than you could in a different forest, where brush and vines might block your view. In the old growth ahead of me, I could see deep into the canopy-shaded woods, darkness enveloping trees that grew in twisted and gnarled shapes, ancient beings shaped by countless years into warped and beautiful lines. I was nearly overtaken by the sight, a view that so few people are able to look upon in this modern age. Even though I was nearly shaking with excitement to explore the acres-large stand of forest ahead of me, I knew that daylight would not last much longer. I would have to push off starting my work until the next day, working quickly to pitch my tent and create a small stone ring to act as my fire pit before nightfall overtook my new campsite. That first night on the edge of the old growth was so quiet. As I lay tightly wrapped in my sleeping bag, staring up through the bent net in the roof of my tent towards the stars above, I heard almost none of the sounds one might expect from camping deep in the woods. No night birds called, no insects buzzed. The only sounds were the rushing of wind through the leaves and, once, the mournful sound of an owl hooting somewhere within the ancient grove beyond my camp. I sat there awake in the eerie silence nearly the entire night, partially perturbed by the quiet but mostly entranced by the beauty of the starlit sky and filled with excitement for the day to come. I eventually drifted off to sleep around 2 a.m. At 5:30 in the morning I was awoken by the electronic chirping of my watch alarm, signaling the start of my day. Groggily sitting up, I immediately regretted not forcing myself to sleep earlier. Yanking the zipper of the tent flap and exposing myself to the chill morning air, I rose to a stoop and began to exit my tent. As my head left the tent, I stopped dead, frozen and staring. I was staring down the barrel of a pump-action shotgun, clutched in the hands of a middle-aged bearded man. He wore old flannel and denim, a stained old baseball cap over a mop of graying hair. His face was cracked and split by intricate wrinkles, the telltale aging endured by a man who had spent his life outdoors. His gray eyes squinted as he met my shocked gaze, lowering the gun. "Well, shit, I'm sorry, son. Didn't expect anybody." "What the hell do you mean you didn't expect anybody?" I asked, anger boiling to the surface as the shock of surprise ebbed away. "You walked into a campsite at 5 in the morning. Why wouldn't there be anybody here?" His gnarled face didn't change from its stony demeanor. "Look, boy, I said I was sorry. No harm, no foul, right?" He shrugged nonchalantly, irritatingly dismissive of the fact that he had a loaded gun pointed between my eyes mere moments ago. He slung the weapon over his shoulder and extended a hand to help me up out of my tent. "Most tents you find up here are empty." It took a moment for what he had said to sink in. "What do you mean?" "Like people come up here, dump their trashed old equipment." Disappointment began to brew as the thought of the old growth filled with trash entered my mind. "Nah, son, nothing like that. Just exactly what I said. The tents you find up here are always empty." "The name's Randy. Randy Davidson. This plot belonged to my grandpa, and his grandpa before him." His West Virginia drawl was thick and slow as he gestured towards the old growth stand. "Before Grandpa sold it to the National Forest folks, eminent domain and whatnot." I furrowed my brow. Not only had I had the shock of my life less than a minute ago, now I was listening to the family history of some Appalachian backwater hick. My patience grew thin. "So is that why you go poking around in other people's shit, scaring them half to death when they wake up?" "For old time's sake." Randy squinted again, unimpressed with my impatience. "Look, boy, all I'm gonna say is that you better watch yourself out in these woods. Grandpa used to tell stories. Was happy to have the feds take the land off his hands. Just pack up and leave is my advice." And with that he turned and started walking away in the direction he came from. I stood there in uneasy silence and just watched him go. What the hell? Was that a warning or a threat? And what could he have possibly meant about empty tents? His message had surprised and confused me as much as his sudden appearance in my camp. The early morning light grew brighter and the mist that clung to the ground burned away as I gathered my things and prepared for my first foray into the old growth stand. I nearly inhaled my breakfast, excited to start my work. Then, pack filled and secured, I stepped beyond the edge of the grove. The old growth was breathtaking. Ancient gnarled trees surrounded me as I walked, dark twisting shapes disappearing into the shadowy canopy high above. No underbrush cluttered the ground, just stoic old boulders and thick sheets of soggy moss. The dense cover of leaves above cast the entire huge stand in a eerie pall of cool shade. The heavy earthy scent of loamy earth and wetwood filled my nose and lungs. Pristine silence filled the forest. I set to work immediately, invigorated by my utterly gorgeous surroundings. The noise I made was the only sound to echo through the ancient woods around me, joining the quiet wind in the leaves above. I identified species, measured trunk diameters, calculated height and slope, judged quality timber from trees best left standing. God damn, I had thought to myself. Almost all of these trees were worth thousands of dollars in timber as individuals. This stand of old growth alone would likely net the company over $1 million after harvest. How in hell had this place not been logged yet? With a metallic rattle and aerosol hiss, I marked the trees that would be harvested with my flagging paint. With the forest floor so clear of undergrowth, the bright orange specks I sprayed on the tree trunks could be seen in the distance in every direction, looming out of the darkness in their obviously unnatural neon hue. It felt strange to be painting this place, so long left beyond the reach of humanity. It was after 4 p.m. and I was finishing up the last sections of the stand I had decided to work on today. There was a small, low valley near the center of the old growth, edged by mossy boulders and muddy slopes. I had nearly finished marking the chosen trees in the valley when I came across something hauntingly strange. As I rounded the massive trunk of a beautiful old red oak, I saw it. Sitting in the middle of a tiny clearing, shaded by the dark leaves above, was the rusted hulk of an old RV. The paint was chipped and peeled away almost to the point of non-existence, though there was still enough left to make out the classic script of Winnebago. The tires were flat, flaccid sacks of rubber draped over rusted hubcaps. Moss grew over the windows of the abandoned vehicle, at least where the glass hadn't shattered and dropped away. The side door hummed limply open on failing hinges, revealing nothing but inky darkness inside. I slowly approached the derelict, wet moss and leaves squelching under my boots. How did this thing get down here? There's no way it could have been driven down the steep slopes of the valley, and there weren't any signs that it had fallen or crashed down here. Besides the ravages of time, the old RV seemed undamaged. I stepped within a few feet of the Winnebago's open door. I fumbled through my backpack and produced my flashlight, noticing that the vehicle was ringed by a thick layer of heavy gray mud. Spurred by curiosity, I clicked my flashlight on and stepped on board the ruined RV through the broken door. As I did so, the entire vehicle let out a wretched moan as rusted springs shifted for the first time in what had likely been decades. I threw a glance back over my shoulder into the forest, suddenly feeling watched. All I noticed through the forest gloom were the neon orange specks I had painted on the trees, pointed at haphazard angles and partially hidden by gnarled trunks. The interior of the RV was dark as night, even with the gloomy daylight filtering through some small sections of broken windows. The stark white beam of my flashlight cut through the blackness, a circle of vision too small for comfort. Something felt off the moment I was inside. The cabin of the vehicle was almost empty, driver and passenger seats devoured down to the metal frames by generations of vermin. Crusty lichen encased the steering column. The cup holders held 2 old metal thermoses, the words #1dad and #1mom just barely visible through the years of sylvan filth that had accumulated upon them. I turned to face the main living space of the old wreck, silence thick on the air and only cut through by the agonized creaks of the moldering floor beneath me. The built-in couch here had suffered the same fate as the cabin seats, devoured by rats and insects searching for a nest. Cupboards hung open near the low ceiling, cardboard boxes of food within reduced to pulp and slurry by years of exposure. I shone my needle of light across the room, noticing the narrow door at the rear. It hung barely ajar, a crack of darkness presumably leading to the RV's bedroom. As I stepped closer, the stench of mildew and wet dirt grew almost overpowering. With a groan of rusty hinges, I pushed the door open. My blood ran cold as my flashlight beam settled on what waited beyond the doorway. Shocked, my breaths came quick and shallow as I took in the sight. The room held a bed, mattress, and blankets untouched by foraging pests, but stained a deep black brown by mold and God knows what else. Upon the bed was a heap of clothing, gathered from the suitcases haphazardly left to rot on the floor around the bed. The clothes were stained the same foul shade as the mattress. I could make out at least 4 distinct sizes of clothing in the pile, 2 adults and 2 children. The stink of rotting vegetation was unimaginable. My hands shook, bobbing my light as they did so, as I gazed at the top of the pile. Atop the wet heap of moldy old clothing was the dripping carcass of a deer, limbs broken and twisted at unnatural angles to allow the decaying thing to be propped in a pose like a man sitting cross-legged. Its head was bowed towards me, what was left of the meat blackened by rot and sloughing from its skull beneath lichen-coated antlers. Its eyes had long since liquefied, dripping down its cheeks in curdled rivulets and leaving empty black sockets to stare into the dark. The cluster of mossy and scattered bones by the headboard revealed that this was merely the most recent animal left here, the next in a long line of slaughtered deer propped up in this macabre. Despite the dribbling animal wreckage before me, there was no smell of rotting meat, just the singularly wretched and overpowering odor of composting vegetation and decomposing fungus. Acrid vomit filled my mouth and sinuses, and I bolted for the door behind me. As I stuck my head and shoulders outside and prepared to retch, my eyes laid upon fresh horn. The bright orange of my marking paint, sprayed at haphazard in dissonant angles as I had wandered the valley, all faced towards me in uniform stares. Every X I had painted down here looked towards me, neon color cutting through the forest gloom like electric eyes. The remainder of the food left my stomach, replaced by ice water as I lurched forward and vomited messily upon the mossy ground. Leaning from inside the RV, body shaking with confusion and terror, I hung my head and wiped the bitter puke from my mouth and tears from my eyes. The smell of rotting wood still clogged my nostrils. I stared at the splatter of fresh vomit below me, attempting to comprehend what I was looking at. The steaming bile was collecting in a footprint in the sticky gray mud. My shaky breath rattled in my lungs as I stared. It was unmistakable. Fresh tracks marred the mud that surrounded the derelict RV, a complete circle that stalked around the vehicle. They were deep, pressed into the muck by something big and heavy. The tracks took the shape of half of a human foot, the long toes and forefoot evident like the tracks of someone walking barefoot and tiptoeing. Jesus Christ, even the partial footprints were bigger than the tracks I had left. How had something so large moved so quietly around the RV? I hadn't heard a thing from inside. I rose to trembling feet and took a cautious step outside. The old growth was utterly silent beyond my nervous panting. The bright orange Texas still stared in my direction, not a one where I had originally placed it. Shit, I thought to myself. I stood, scanning the empty forest floor and listening for any sounds to pierce the quiet. Seconds passed, feeling like an eternity, and then I bolted. Blood pounded in my ears as I sprinted through the forest, never once slowing as I made for camp. The feeling of a cold, calculating gaze from unseen eyes never left my back as I ran. I skidded into my tiny camp on the edge of the stand as the sun began to dip in a darkening sky, nearly collapsing with exhaustion as the daylight that filtered through the trees above began to die. As I panted and gasped with exertion, I surveyed my surroundings, my tent and fire ring appearing untouched since I left this morning. As dusk settled over the forest, my surroundings began to darken. It wouldn't be long until they were as black as the old growth at my back. There was no way I could leave tonight. Even if I wasn't petrified to be out in the dark, there wasn't a chance in hell I could find my way back to Piper through black and unfamiliar woods. My mind raced as daylight failed around me. Do I set a fire and hope light and flame keeps whatever was out here at bay? Or do I sit in the darkness and pray that I stay hidden in a shadowy and silent camp? There were no good options. My bowels knotted inside me as I fought to keep panic from setting in. Eventually, the primal instincts of my cave-dwelling ancestors kicked in. Fire was the one tool that had always served our kind against the darkness and the things that lurked within it. I piled all of my firewood into the rain. I wouldn't need it for another night, and as night fell, the glowing light of my bonfire lit the forest around me, faltering at the edge of the old growth. My camp bathed in firelight. I climbed inside my tent and sealed the zipper shut. I sat silently inside the thin nylon shell for hours, listening as the wind made the only sound beyond the crackling of my fire which glowed through the walls of the tent. My hands shook and my spine prickled with nerves. My teeth chattered despite the humid heat that clung to my body, sweat dripping from my brow. I moved slowly to check my watch. 3:30 a.m. Less than 2 hours until the first break of daylight, less than 2 hours until I could flee this place. I jolted as a sudden snap shattered the silence, the sharp cracking noise emanating not 20 feet from my tent and followed by staccato rustling before deathly silence. My eyes were wide, breath caught in my throat. The quiet, nearly imperceptible rustling came again. Whatever was outside was still there. I slowly grasped the zipper pull with my left hand, while fumbling about with my right until it came to rest upon my pocket knife. It was a feeble little thing, barely helpful as a tool for whittling, but as a gift from my dad it always found its way into my pack. With my impotent little blade clutched tight, I opened the door of my tent, agonizingly slowly to keep the zipper quiet. I crept out into the night, the chill air shockingly cold as it connected with my overheated and clammy skin. The bonfire still burned, though it had run low as the night dragged on. Silently surveying the camp before me, I searched for the source of the hushed sound. Slowly my gaze was drawn upwards into the boughs of the trees. Two eyes reflected in the firelight, staring back at me. Shock gripped my heart, and it took all of my willpower not to exclaim with fear and surprise. The eyes cocked to the side, as if judging me. With more quiet rustles, the owl shifted on its branch, close enough that the firelight revealed its identity. Relief flooded my body, and I let out a quiet sigh. Then true terror overtook me as I noticed the huge shape in my peripheral vision. I slowly turned my head, tears welling up in my eyes. It sat waiting on its haunches barely 6 feet away from me, dimly lit by the embers of the slowly dying fire. At first I thought it was a huge man, a giant living in the woods. But this thing was no human. Never could have been. It sat nearly curled in a fetal ball, long arms clasped to scrawny legs and shoulders hunched. Completely naked, its humanoid form was covered in greasy, pale skin stretched taut over knobby bones and joints. Black-gray veins pulsed beneath its thin flesh. The thing's elongated arms and legs were triple-jointed, digitigrade like the hind legs of a repulsively malnourished and hairless goat. Its arms ended in hands each bearing 6 long and twitching fingers tipped with ragged and blackened nails. Its legs terminated in feet that may have been human, if they were not twisted and deformed to allow the thing to walk on its mud and filth-caked toes. It carried an unbearable stench of fungus and compost. But most horrible of all was its face. Atop its spindly neck rested the thing's gaunt head, oily and pale skin reflecting the guttering flames in the fire pit. Its nose and chin were hideously long and crooked, not unlike the jagged and pointed features stereotypical of ancient witches. Its mouth was wide and lipless, flesh pulled back to reveal black gums and long, blunted teeth that looked as if they had been taken from a human jaw and stretched cartoonishly to fit this horror's skull. Though it had no eyes, it stared intently at the owl in the tree. No, not eyeless. The twisted and hulking creature crouched beside me slowly turned its head to face me. Barely visible, white orbs rolled and twitched in sunken eye sockets, bulging underneath a pallid and thin membrane of flesh. The horror stared silently at me before raising a single finger to its lipless and drooling teeth. It let out a quiet, gurgling breath. Shoo. Panic set my body ablaze. I scrambled to my feet, dropping my tiny pocket knife into the mud. The owl let out a shrieking protest as it took flight, spooked by my sudden movement. As I stumbled backwards, starting my sprint into the pitch-black forest, the thing rose to its feet on tri-jointed legs. Good God, the thing had to have been at least 7 feet tall, but its body moved without making a sound. As I turned and ran, it let out a hideous gasping screech, a sound laden with ancient hate. I didn't look back, dashing through the underbrush away from the old growth and leaving an empty tent to join the others Randy had found. I don't know if it followed me. It was so big, but it moved so silently. As I ran, I didn't see it, didn't hear it. But the feeling of its gaze never left me. I ran blindly in the dark, whipping branches and bramble thorns slashing my face and hands seemingly to ribbons. Blood and sweat drenched me, cooling in my hiking boots. I don't know how long I ran. At some point I must have collapsed with exhaustion, blacking out in the depths of the forest. I woke up in the glaring shine of daylight, filtering down onto my face through the trees. My face and hands were caked with blood and dirt. At least 2 of my fingers were broken, or at least dislocated. Rising on shaking legs, I began my blind trek into the unfamiliar woods around me, hopelessly lost. I walked for hours, likely wandering in circles. My face and hands ached with dull, pulsing pain. The skin of my chest itched and burned underneath my shirt. Finally, I stumbled onto the forest trail, old and ill-maintained. I couldn't believe my luck. I had resigned myself to being lost, dying alone and hunted deep in unsettled Appalachia. Tears welled up as I hurriedly limped down the path, and I nearly shouted with elation when Piper came into view. Fumbling with my keys, I managed to unlock her and climb inside, slamming and locking the door behind me. As I fired the ignition and the truck started up, the burning on my chest intensified, an awful itching sensation. Grimacing, I quickly set about undoing the buttons of my shirt to see what the cause of my discomfort was. As I did so, a subtle stench of old vegetation began wafting into my truck. I felt cold eyes staring from the fringes of the woods. I pulled my shirt open, exposing my chest and the source of the itch. Across the flesh of my chest, sprayed there with marker paint, was a bright orange X. The day I had been dreading finally came. After months of denied reports, quiet but heated arguments behind my boss' closed door, and the most intense procrastination ever known to man the company sent me back to the old growth. Good Lord, you have to believe I fought it. But in the end, my protests were less than useless. I would have quit this job if I could, but I have bills to pay, fees to keep my parents cared for in their old age. There was nowhere to hide. The neon orange marker paint that I had discovered sprayed into a forester's X upon my chest had washed away easily enough, but it had left behind an angry red rash of scaly skin and scarlet warmth. The doctor told me that it was likely an allergic reaction to a chemical propellant in the aerosol, or a component of the paint itself. The itching rash had faded over time but never fully disappeared, the faintest ghost of the mark that haunted me just barely visible to those who cared to look close enough. I had completed 1 or 2 assignments since the experience I previously recounted for you all, working in Pennsylvania and around DC to mark up and measure tiny stands of trees just outside of bustling suburban corridors. Even in those minuscule groves of adolescent trees and shrubs, the green glow of the canopy sent shivers down my spine and bile rising in my throat. I was a wreck in nearly every sense of the word, and I don't think anyone who believed me could blame me. The problem was that no one actually did believe me, not truly. The email from the company heads came on March 2nd, 2020. When I saw it in my inbox, I had sat silently staring in my cubicle for agonizing minutes before finally resigning myself to cold acceptance. I scanned the details with defeat. Return to parcel. Monongahela National Forest. Work imperative. Multi-million-dollar stake. Depart immediately. Fuck. The rest of that morning is just a foggy blur, dragging myself through my duties in preparation to return to the place where I had encountered something I could not explain. Something I could not forget. It must have been just before noon when Piper and I were roaring down the interstate towards the dreaded grove, acres of black woods and hidden things. God, I shouldn't have gone. I have no recollection of the 4-hour drive into the depths of West Virginia. The next thing I knew, I was standing next to my truck, engine clicking and popping as it cooled and settled, with my heavy pack slung over my shoulders. Ahead of me loomed the narrow trailhead that led to a forest the world had forgotten. Mostly forgotten. With a shuddering breath, I steeled myself and stepped into the woods. The sensation was so strange. My mind was caught in a vicious wrestling match between feelings of mortal terror and the comfort of coming home. I absent-mindedly pawed at the faded mark under my shirt as I tramped along the winding and overgrown path. Thoughts churned and changed within my aching skull. The things I had seen here, half remembered and half unforgettable. The splendor of the unspoiled forest around me. Grinning, lipless teeth. The endless awe of the old growth. I walked in a daze-like man towards the gallows, or perhaps towards a holy reliquary. By the time I walked around the old sycamore tree, just a few scant bones left lashed to its branches, I had regained my senses. The sights and sounds of the woods returned to me as I made towards my old campsite. I wiped the watery stuff running from my nose. It was cold out here, only the first buds of the year starting to appear on the branches of the trees. This was about the time I began cursing myself for coming back out here, but it was far too late now. Suddenly I stepped out into the tiny clearing in which I had once made camp. On the far end of the break in the woods waited the boundary of the old grove, looming in ancient trees cast in the shade of dark, dead leaves that still clung to their soaring branches in stark refusal to let sunlight desecrate the floor of the grove. Even in the latest days of winter and the earliest days of spring, shadow ruled the old growth waiting ahead. As I stared, a chill wind whispered from between the tree trunks, stinging my face and whipping through my hair. A grim thought crawled through my mind. Yeah, hello to you too. Pulling my gaze from the dark boundary ahead of me, I surveyed the small clearing. The ground was sodden and muddy with snowmelt, the detritus of winter fading away with the season. The shredded remnants of my old tent stood in half-hearted defiance of gravity, poles bent and broken in angles better suited to modern art. Slowly pulling open the door flap of the mostly collapsed tent, I saw that all of the original contents were missing. My sleeping bag and the backpack I had carried out here previously nowhere to be seen. I let the tent flap fall limply back. There was no salvaging the nylon heap. Just as Randy, the local who had accosted me last time I was here, had said, the tents you find here are always empty. I turned around to check the fire pit less than a dozen feet behind me. The stones were still there, but not as I had left them. The rounded forest stones, now covered in crawling moss and flaking lichen, were stacked in a perfect tower that came up to stomach height. One on top of another, they were balanced immaculately. The slightest breeze should have been enough to upset the delicate cairn, but the stones did not fall. Atop the tower of stones, untouched by vegetation, age, or weather, was my pocket knife, dropped in the shock of my previous encounter here. With a spiteful sniff, I snatched the knife and gave the stones a small kick, letting the tower crumble into a disparate pile. I made camp in the clearing over the next hour or so, pitching my new tent and reconstructing the fire ring. I unfurled the large ball of twine I had brought with me, attaching aluminum cans to it as I laid a tripwire perimeter around my little oasis. Setting an alarm like this would likely do little to help me should something go wrong during my stay here, but it eased my worry just the same. As night fell, I sat by my fire, listening to the silence of this forest that I knew all too well. I awoke in my tent in the early morning rays of sunlight to the tinny buzzing of my watch, letting me know it was time to work. I went through my morning routine, had my breakfast, threw my backpack on, stepped over my tripwire, and marched as stoically as I could muster across the clearing towards the waiting old grove. As I quietly stepped across the mossy floor of the darkened grove, I noticed one thing. My work was gone. All of the bright orange spexes I had marked upon the trees that were to be harvested had disappeared like mist in the wind. That paint was designed to last as long as logging projects may drag on, sometimes years, and I had sprayed it here barely 6 months ago. And now it was all gone. The bark of the trees, barren of paint and gnarled and blackened by hundreds of years, mocked me. Gritting my teeth, I began to work. I toiled for hours that day in the chilly March weather, the ancient forest around me silent beyond the sounds of my work. Measuring, mapping, marking, I went through my tasks quickly and robotically, never once shaking the undeniable sensation of cold eyes on my back. Maybe my fear made me more perceptive, or maybe the forest and what waited within it simply chose to show me more than it had before. Whatever the case, I saw things. Rare sights that punctuated the hours within the stand. Animal bones lashed to and dangling from branches that towered over the muddy ground. A bright yellow hunter's cap, soaked with water and stuffed into a gap between boulders. The rusted lower frame and wheels of an old-fashioned baby carriage. A tangled pile of twine and aluminum cans, new and untouched by age or weather. There was less than an hour of daylight left as I finished up my first day of work. I rounded the thick trunk of a massive honey locust, stinging odor of marker paint still wafting from the fresh X I had marked there. Beyond the old tree was a steep forest pothole, perhaps a sinkhole that had collapsed thousands of years ago. It dropped barely 5 feet down, and maybe 10 feet across. Drawn by some strange human curiosity, I peered over the edge. The sides of the shallow pit were choked with thick roots and sheets of moss, creating a coiled mass of wet vegetation that snaked downwards, dangling into the murky foot and a half of rainwater and snowmelt that collected at the bottom of the wide hole. The smell of stagnant water and something far worse rose up to meet my running nose, causing me to recoil and gag at the stench. My mouth went dry and a shiver ran down my spine as I gazed upon what floated in the pit below. Fermented with oozing mud and rotting mold clung to bloated meat which split at joints and folds under the pressures of corpse gas. Skin flensed away from limbs and extremities revealed the darkened and spongy remnants of exposed bone, soaked through with the stinking and stagnant water that filled the pool. A single clouded and milky white eye stared up at me from a face turned aside, suspended in clear sludge that clotted in the socket of a skull barely held together by rotten ribbons of tendon and cartilage. The horrid carcass had at one point been a large dog, perhaps a German shepherd judging from the scattered patches of fur that remained. Strapped across the dog's hollow and collapsing rib cage was the old backpack I had left behind the first time I came to the old growth. The sharp sound of a snapping twig came from behind me and I whirled to face the noise, sudden shock gripping my racing heart. A man stood there, wrinkled and weather-beaten face below a stained old cap. I recognized Randy Davidson a split second before he spoke. "Well, I'll be damned," he drawled, recognition sparking in eyes as gray as his hair. The remnants of the rash on my chest throbbed dully. "It's you again. What the hell are you doing back out?" he dashed. His question was suddenly cut short as a massive pale shape lunged from the growing shadows around us, the hulking white thing moving soundlessly as it slammed Randy into the muddy ground. He let out a pained gasp as the air was knocked from his lungs. With inhuman speed it whipped around to face me, and blood ran cold as I laid eyes on its all-too-familiar lipless grin and greasy flesh. The stench of rotting moss wafted over me. Pale orbs rolled and twitched in their membrane-covered sockets as the horror stuck at me, a single triple-jointed arm lashing out and bashing into my chest. The thing hit with the strength of a feral beast, bolts of pain shooting through my chest as I felt my sternum pop. The lightning-fast blow sent me skidding and stumbling backwards, the sensation of weightlessness overtaking me as I tumbled down into the pit at my back. I was still attempting to suck in air in response to the creature's painful strike when I hit the water, forwarded, and stinking liquid rushing into my mouth and throat. I had landed almost directly onto the carcass of the dog, the floating mass of rotten meat and fur all but dissolved as I passed through it, clouding the already foul and murky water with disintegrating particulates of decomposing animal which stuck to my teeth as I thrashed in the murk. I lurched upwards out of the shallow pool, alternately gasping for air and vomiting bile and rainwater corrupted by rot. Blood laced with adrenaline roared in my ears. I could hear the sounds of desperate struggle above, crashing branches and splattering mud accompanied by Randy's screams of pain and terror. I scabbed bled at the slick moss and roots around me, desperately attempting to haul myself the short distance out of the stinking pit. Slipping on wet vegetation and collapsing mud, I managed to drag my head and shoulders above the lip of the old sinkhole. I saw Randy struggling against the pale thing that stalked the old growth, pinned to the churned ground with its drooling mouth and long hooked nose mere inches from his face. He clenched his fists and kicked his legs impotently as it pressed him down into the damp forest floor. I watched on in horror as the thing craned its neck downwards with an almost serpentine sway, joints creaking in its spine as it did so. It parted its long, blunted teeth and a tongue emerged, a thin whipping tendril segmented and smooth as the skin of an impossibly distended leech. For a split second the tar-black tongue hovered, dripping thick ropes of phlegmy drool before lashing down Randy's throat. His intensifying screams were muffled as the horror leaned in, embracing him in this foul, lipless perversion of a passionate lover's kiss. They held their struggling for long, agonizing seconds as I hauled myself fully out of the pit. It then craned backwards, turning its horrid face to meet my terrified stare. Its worm-like tongue snaked back into its gullet as Randy gasped for breath under its grip. Its teeth clenched in a disgusting mockery of a grin, glistening bands of viscous spittle still bridging the gap between it and its victims' mouths. I sat sprawled on all fours at the edge of the pit as it released Randy, spectral grace belying its monstrous size as it rose to its full, towering height. Joints and tendons creaked within its gaunt and jaundiced body as it took slow and purposeful steps towards my prone form. A deep croaking click slowly emanated from the depths of its throat as it reached towards me with filthy black fingernails. With a sudden jerk, I was yanked violently to my feet and dragged to the side. It was Randy, coughing with exertion as he pulled me by my shirt collar. "Come on and run," he gasped, not letting go of me as he began sprinting into the woods that surrounded us. I pumped my legs to keep up, the speed of terror propelling me. We dove through the old growth, ancient trees seeming to twist around us in the growing darkness. Mud clotted our boots and threatened to pull us to the ground with every step we took. I followed Randy, hoping to God he had a destination and was not simply running into the woods in a panic. Looking over my shoulder, I could not see the thing following us, but I could hear it somewhere in the gloom as it laughed and called, noises like the hellish fusion of a squealing pig and cackling lunatic. I don't know how long we fled into the deepening night. The sun had disappeared completely by the time we stopped, panting for breath and nervously eyeing the woods around us. Randy, keeled over with his hands on his knees, gave a short grunt and waved a finger past me. I turned to check what he was pointing at and saw a dark shape looming out of the darkness, the squat and blocky bulk of a lightless cabin. I helped Randy towards the structure as he fumbled around in his pockets, producing a jangling and heavily laden keyring. He seemed sluggish, as if the run had taken a steep toll on his body. We crossed the creaking porch with haste. The cabin was a plain thing of log timbers, beaten and drained by weather and age until they were desiccated and gray. I stared grimly at the old wooden door, which bore a crude and obviously recent carving of an axe. Randy shoved an old-fashioned iron key into the lock and shoved the door open, hurrying inside. I followed. Randy fumbled ahead of me in the darkness, rattling objects which I could not see. I heard the telltale rasping of a lighter followed by the flash of the flint. Then, after excruciating seconds, the flickering glow of a tiny fire sent dancing illumination to weakly fill the space around us. The cabin was tiny, one room of maybe 15 feet on each side. A small cast iron stove, choked beyond usefulness by thick layers of rust, with an old pile of firewood at its side, stood at my right. Directly ahead was a square table on which rested an eclectic gathering of woodworking tools and dining utensils in haphazard stacks, as well as the flickering candle that Randy had lit. 2 stools waited tucked underneath the table's lip. At the back of the room was a simple bed, sheets stretched across its lumpy mattress almost entirely eaten by moths and mice. Small glass-paned windows glinted in the candlelight. Everything was drenched in dust and the smell of mildew, obviously untouched for years. Randy lurched past me, slamming the door shut and ramming the deadbolt closed. As he moved close to me, I could smell foul sweat dripping from his pores. "Help me lock the shutters," he grunted. I moved to oblige him, pulling the heavy wooden shutters over the small windows and looping the hook locks closed. He talked quietly as he worked to close the windows on the other side of the cabin. "Great-grandpa's hunting cabin. Came out here once or twice when I was a kid with my old man to check on the property after Grandpa sold it off." He paused to expel a hacking cough. Lucky I even remembered where it was. I glanced over my shoulder as I moved to the final window on my side of the room. "Randy, what the hell is that thing?" "Your guess is as good as mine. I ain't ever seen anything like that before in my life." I heard him take a shaky breath. My granddad used to say something wasn't right with these woods. Would tell us things. My old man would tell him off for spinning ghost stories. Christ, well, what do we do now? Fuck me, I should never have come back. The hinges creaked as I forced the shutters up against the window. "Yeah, maybe you shouldn't have." Randy trailed off as he struggled with his own window behind me. "Randy." I probed his silence began to grow. As I slowly turned to see the cause of the quiet, a foul sound and stench assaulted my senses. A wet, rumbling explosion of gas and a viscous splattering upon the ground, and the burning odor of sickness, sulfur, and shit brought stinging tears to my eyes. "Jesus Christ, Randy. Are you fucking kidding him?" The angry words caught in my throat as I whirled around to face him. Randy stood facing me, shivering in place. His face, gaunt and pale, streamed with sweat and tears which ran and pooled in the deep wrinkles of his skin. Dark circles, the deep purple of an old bruise, had formed under his eyes which stared blankly ahead, pooling with liquid and glassy like those of a dead animal. His nose and lips dribbled with spit and mucus. Foul sludge ran from his pad legs to pool around his boots. It was as black as tar and watery, with clots of solids the color and consistency of old, boiled coffee grounds. The smell was unbelievably horrid. Randy parted clammy lips and whispered a quiet, "Well, damn," before collapsing to the ground in a pool of his own sickness, sliding down the old timbers to lay sprawled against the cabin wall. Gagging and fighting back panic, I rushed to his side. He rolled his head weakly to face me, the drool dripping from his lips beginning to run as black as the stuff that gathered underneath him. "Oh my God, Randy, what's happening?" I took his sweat-drenched hand in my own. "Granddad got sick like this. Came back from the woods one night. Came back like this." Randy let out a slow, gurgling cough. God, nobody knew what happened. He didn't even make it through the night. We all watched him in his bed, screaming. Screaming that it had rotted his insides. That it had got him. Nobody knew what he was talking about. Lord help me. His breath was feverishly hot on my face and smelled of compost and spoiled meat. As he spoke, the boards of the cabin's front porch let out a painful creak. Randy let out an agonized moan as a fresh spew of black foulness joined the pool below him. "Oh God, oh God. Please." Spittle as dark as pitch ran freely from his mouth now. He stared with begging eyes towards me. "Please. Kill me." The Beck-shaped rash on my chest felt as if it were on fire. Slow, taunting scratching rattled along the door. With his free hand, Randy groped at my side. His face was a shattered mosaic of pain and strenuous effort drenched in a sweat of sickness. With a weak grunt, he brought his hand up. Clutched in his pale and shaking fingers was my pocket knife, the one my dad had given me long ago. He pressed the folded blade into my hand. "Please, please, don't let me die like my grandpa did. Kill me," he softly begged. The door at my back groaned as slow, even pressure was applied. Randy's sorrowful and cloudy eyes stared at me as I unfolded the tiny knife, a small sliver of glinting metal shining in the candlelight. My chest was a stinging matrix of pain. I held my breath as I stared at the little implement in my hand, then back to Randy. There was a sharp pop and clatter as the deadbolt snapped and fell to the floor behind me. Please. As the cabin door crept open with a dreadful creak, I ran my pocket knife across Randy's throat. A gush of blood, blackened and corrupted by sickness and rot, splashed over my hands and lap. It was nearly unbearably hot, burning with fever heat. He gasped and gurgled through a shredded windpipe for a pained final moment before falling silent and further slumping soundlessly into the mess beneath him. The stench of decay poured from his body. I kneeled there sobbing as the floorboards behind me creaked and shifted with a heavy weight. A throaty click emanated from directly above my head. I closed my eyes. A weighty hand came to rest atop my skull, inhumanly long fingers stroking my face. I sat immobile as creaking joints moved above me. More deep chittering. The sound of wet dragging and a hefty thump. The hand left my head. The wet sounds and creaking floorboards retreated towards the door, and then were replaced by the crackling of something dragged across the forest floor deeper into the old growth. I sat in the cabin, eyes screwed tightly shut, drenched in the stench of rot, and knees soaking in blood and filth, until weak rays of sunlight warmed my back through the open doorway. I opened my aching eyelids. Randy was gone, his corpse pulled away, leaving behind a black trail of coagulating gore and shit which disappeared out into the woods. My pocket knife lay in front of me, tiny blade stained and sticky. I left it there as I rose to shaking feet. Mindlessly, I wandered the old growth. I trudged like a dead man, unfeeling and unthinking. I must have stumbled circles around the forest for hours, filthy pad legs sticking to my skin with every step. In the end, I found myself staring at my truck, my faithful old Piper, through bleary eyes. On the stark white paint of her hood, smeared in rotten black gore, was a huge forester's Bex. A squealing cackle echoed somewhere in the distant woods. Where the filthy lines crossed in the center of the hood rested my pocket knife, clean and folded. The world has all but forgotten the old growth. But I never will. Thank you for listening to Night Whispers. Story 2. My uncle has a strange set of rules. I moved in with my uncle who had a strange set of rules. When I was 12, I was forced to spend a summer with my great uncle Jeremy. You see, I was a bit of a troublemaker back in those days. My parents thought if I spent some time with my strict grouch of an uncle, I would somehow be rehabilitated. You can imagine how hard my eyes rolled when my mom and dad told me about their plan, but I was oblivious to the horrors I would endure that summer. Uncle Jeremy was somewhat of a mountain man. He lived in the remote wilderness of Montana's high pine forest. A homesteader through and through, he made a life where most people would go insane. Granted, Uncle Jeremy did seem a bit kooky to me at the time. My dad almost tossed me out of the car as we rolled into my uncle's mountain cabin. He didn't even wait for Uncle Jeremy to greet me at the door. I watched as Dad's little Prius made its way back down the long driveway and onto the unkempt dirt road. While I was a bit offended by how I'd just been abandoned, I was not envious of the long journey ahead of him. It took us almost 2 hours to traverse that nasty road. I was sure we'd be left stranded at one point or another. A Prius is no off-roading vehicle. The hybrid's tail lights disappeared amongst the dense forest. My attention turned to the rickety wooden cabin. This house was not what you would imagine it to be. It wasn't the picturesque idea people have when they think of a log cabin. I could see the structure had been through a lot. The logs were weathered, faded by the hot Montana summer and the icy winter winds. I could tell that everything used in its construction was sourced from the surrounding forest. Likewise, no modern amenities were visible, no power lines, fire hydrants, or even a satellite dish. I knew then it would be a duller summer than I'd imagined. I lifted a hand to knock on the old door and stopped when I noticed a few deep scratch marks on its facade. Bears, I thought to myself. An uneasy feeling that I was being watched from the pines came over me. I cocked my head in the direction of the tree line. It felt like something was calling me over to the woods. The door squealed open and I returned my gaze to the cabin. In the passageway stood a gray-bearded man, the fibers in his beard long, greasy, and matted. His skin was old and weathered. I suspected the same reasoning as the cabin's. He looked at me through the gray film in his eyes. I'd never actually met Uncle Jeremy up until that point, but I'd heard stories about him from my father. My father had suffered the same fate as me the summer between 7th and 8th grade. He told me Uncle Jeremy was not a man to be trifled with. You listen to everything your Uncle Jeremy tells you. He is not a man you want to make angry. My father would lecture, but when I looked into the face of the withering man, I didn't sense an ounce of animosity. He almost seemed kind. Nothing resembled the ferocity my father had mentioned. "Hi, I'm Marcus." I outstretched my hand in the introduction, but he slapped it away before placing a hand over my mouth. "Shoo, we don't say names here." He moved my head over to the side to make sure no one, or nothing, was listening. More of my father's description of my great-uncle came to mind. "Uncle Jeremy is a bit strange, but he has your best interest in mind. Try your best to ignore his lack of civility." His words were all starting to make sense now. Uncle Jeremy ushered me into the cabin and I thought I heard him whisper my name as he pushed me inside. That is until I turned to see the look of fear in his eyes. I knew then that the sound had drifted in on the early summer breeze, somewhere beyond the tree line. The hairs on the back of my neck stood. "Is everything okay, Uncle Jeremy?" His open palm slapped my cheek as I spoke his name. "Damn it, kid. I told you no names," he said through gritted teeth before returning his gaze to the tree line. Almost like a dream, a faint voice slithered into the cabin. "Jeremy." The voice called. "What the hell is that?" I asked but received no reply. Uncle Jeremy quickly slammed the door shut. "Rule number 1, no names." I dropped my gaze at his reprimand. "Rule number 2, if you hear something strange, leave it be. Ignore it. You hear me?" I pondered his instructions before moving to question his logic. "Why? Not another word on the matter. Those are the rules. My only rules. You follow them or I'll send you back to your little life in Boise, you hear me?" Just then my escape from homestead living became clear. Break a few rules here and there and I'd be back in the gem state. I tried not to smile at the plot that was formulating in my mind. "Your room is down yonder." The old man pointed down a small hallway before leading me to it himself. We stepped into a small 10 by 10 room. I threw my backpack onto the bed and plopped down right beside it, giving a grunt of relief. "What do you think you're doing, kid? This isn't some luxurious mountain retreat." I eyed the crumbling wooden walls, the understatement of the century, I thought to myself. "We have work to do." He moved to the window and pushed open the shutters, taking in a lungful of pristine mountain air in the process. Beyond his gaze stood a 2-acre clearing in the forest. A mix of fields, more comparable to glorified gardens, and livestock, chickens, goats, and 1 cow. He turned to me and noted my disappointed face. "What do you think, this was a free ride?" "No, we work for our food here," he said with the first ounce of enjoyment I'd seen inch across his face. He pulled open a drawer on the nightstand. "I placed these here for you before you got here." I peered into the drawer to find some old torn overalls. "You put those on and meet me outside. There's a lot to get done around here. The faster we get it over with, the faster we can have ourselves a nice supper." Later that night I lay in bed unable to sleep. All of my muscles were aching. Uncle Jeremy was not lying. Homestead living is not for the weak. We'd worked until the sun met the horizon, and this time of year in Montana, That was around 9:30 p.m. We'd weeded the fields, fed the chickens, and milked the dairy cow whose name I found out to be Bessie, and done dozens upon dozens of other tasks that were not very enjoyable. The best thing about it was that Uncle Jeremy said we would do it all again the next day. I placed the pillow over my face hoping that it would suffocate me. I was a beat dog that needed to be put out of its misery. The warmth of the plush fabric seemed to comfort me a bit, so I left it there as the night slowly started to wash over me. Just as I was about to fall into an uneasy night of sleep, I heard scratching from the other side of the wall. It was coming from outside. The sound was very faint. It almost reminded me of the time we had mice inside the walls back home, only these walls were not hollow, they were solid lumber. I moved the pillow off to the side, making sure that nothing needed the scraping by my head. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The noise sounded rhythmic, as if someone was sending a message. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Whatever it was clawing deeper into the side of the cabin. The noisemaker was making the noise was too strong to be a mouse, a raccoon maybe. Then the sound intensified to a loud ear-piercing screech, like someone clawing at an old chalkboard. Screech, screech, screech. I shot to a seated position. It must have been a bear. Montana grizzly scared the shit out of me, part of the reason why I'd never come to meet Uncle Jeremy in the first place. I heard the same faint whisper that had come from the tree line earlier that day, only this time instead of Uncle Jeremy's name, my name hissed through the cracks of the cabin. Merkerkus. I looked at the shutters on the window, and my heart dropped when I saw something slowly pulling them open. Uncle Jeremy. I shouted. From down the hall, I heard a bedroom door smash open, followed by my room's door. Uncle Jeremy stood there holding his .22 in hand, his eyes meeting mine, before noticing the slowly creeping shutters. He leaned the gun on the wooden wall before running over to the shutters and forcing them closed. He quickly locked the latch before turning to me. Kid, I had 2 rules and you broke both of them the first night. He shouted at me while I made sense of what just happened. I was hoping that the more my uncle talked, the more the situation would clear up, but everything he said just made me more confused and frankly, terrified. Now you've done it, kid. It now knows our names, it's imprinted on us. You have no idea how hard it was to get rid of the last one. The last one. I thought. What are you talking about? I quivered. Never mind that. From now on you keep these shutters locked here. You didn't have to tell me twice. The whole house is going to be locked down. And just so we're clear, if you hear me calling your name, it ain't me. What the hell, what else could it be? I thought before I opened my mouth to ask a clarifying question. What is it? I said. What's my second rule? My uncle commanded. I pondered for a bit before responding. If I see something, leave it be. That's right. Leave it be. No more of this. We will not talk about it anymore. It will only encourage it. Suddenly, I no longer wanted to go through with my plot to get Uncle Jeremy to send me home. The next morning after breakfast, Uncle Jeremy and I stepped outside to inspect the side of the wall where the noise was coming from. Uncle Jeremy touted a gun belt today, a Magnum revolver in its sheath. When we gazed at the marks on the wall, I was sure that no grizzly had created the noise. These scratches were not random like the ones on the door. No, these markings were indeed a message. Drawn on the wooden logs was a cryptic symbol, a circle with 3 jagged lines drawn through it. On top of this circle were 2 names, Jeremy and Marcus. I gulped as Uncle Jeremy got a closer look. He gave a nervous chuckle. He'll be back tonight, he said in a tone that desiring itself to be false. My stomach fluttered in fear. Bessie, the dairy cow, gave an agonizing moo. I could tell that something was bothering her. Uncle Jeremy turned with a sad look on his face. He took to his feet and walked his way over to the cow. When he was feet away from her, he took to one knee. It's already begun. I looked over his shoulder and my mouth dropped when I saw the sight of gore that still torments me to this day. Bessie's udders were mutilated, flesh hanging off of each of the protrusions, and flies feasting on her fresh wounds as blood mixed with milk. Poor Bessie, Uncle Jeremy said. I could tell that seeing his cow suffer made him emotional. I moved to comfort him, but before my hand could graze his shoulder, he stood. He unholstered the magnum and pointed it at Bessie's head. One shot rang out as every bird in the vicinity took flight. Bessie was dead. She now lay in a pool of blood and brain matter. Uncle Jeremy wiped away some tears before turning around and walking briskly back to the cabin. Come on, kid, we have to get ready. I knew that we were heading for some kind of battle. When the night fell on the cabin that day, Uncle Jeremy and I did not talk. We had barricaded ourselves and all of the livestock inside the little cabin. A total of 22 chickens, 7 goats, and a variety of domesticated geese. He'd thrust a rifle in my hand and give me instructions on how to shoot, though he said not to use it unless something happened to him. For the most part, the night was quiet. The chickens and geese had roosted for the night, and the goats had lost the excitement of being in a new environment. They now huddled together in a corner of the living room. I would almost say it was peaceful, until every animal began screeching at the top of their lungs. The birds flocked around the house. The goats erupted in a panic, running around trying to find any hiding place they could. Most now cowered under the dining room table. Almost as quickly as the commotion began, it all quieted down. I looked at Uncle Jeremy in bewilderment, but the look in his eye told me he'd seen all of this before. His eyes trained on the door. A familiar sound slid across the other side. It was the scratching that we'd heard the night before. In the same fashion, the scratching intensified before it erupted into a frenzy of banging. I eyed the door as the latch struggled to keep whatever was on the other side out. A voice soon followed suit. Jeremy, Jeremy, Jeremy. Oh, Uncle Jeremy. It sounded like me. For some reason, whatever was on the other side was using my voice as bait. The voice changed to that of Uncle Jeremy's. Marcus. Open the door, Marcus. Uncle Jeremy looked at me before raising his revolver to the door. One shot rang out and the sound of something hitting the floor was evident from our vantage point. My uncle took to his feet and made his way over to the door, revolver at the ready. I wanted to tell him to stay put but couldn't find the courage. He opened the top latch, followed by the bottom. The door cautiously creaked open and Uncle Jeremy peered out of the small crack. I will remember the words that came from his mouth for the rest of my life. Oh, shit. Suddenly a clawed hand reached through the small crack in the door and pulled him from the comforts of the cabin. I heard screams but wasn't sure if they belonged to Uncle Jeremy or the thing impersonating him. Everything went quiet and I wrestled with the idea of seeing what the outcome of the skirmish was. Just then I heard a voice that brought me a mountain of relief. It's okay, kid. I got him. I heard Uncle Jeremy grunt as he seemingly took to his feet from the other side of the door. But as the door slowly swung open, my heart dropped. It wasn't my uncle. It was the creature that had taken him. Its body was tall and skinny, its skin pale, and its face, well, it had no face, just a plain identity. But as it stood there and turned in my direction, a mouth began to part. Skin sticking to its upper and lower jaws like large wads of gum, until they eventually gave way to sharp teeth. It spoke one more time in my uncle's voice. Marcus. It took to a sprint, and when it was just feet from me, a revolver round spat out. The creature flopped to the floor in a green pool of blood. Standing at the door was my injured Uncle Jeremy. After that night, I had no problems following any of Uncle Jeremy's rules, no matter how arbitrary they were. We worked his homestead all summer, and I never mentioned his name again. I was never one for the rules, but in this instance, I was not going to summon another creature. Although I would see things dart beyond the tree line, I never mentioned them. At the end of the summer, I was adamant that I would never spend another day with my Uncle Jeremy, a model citizen through and through. 10 years later, I received word that my great-uncle Jeremy had passed. At first, I suspected old age. He was ancient after all, but my father informed me that it had been a bear attack that ended his life. He was a hard son of a bitch, and a hard son of a bitch deserved to go out like a man, I thought to myself. But then I started to question if a bear was really the culprit. My thoughts turned to the creature that once called from the other side of the cabin walls. I thought of its blank face and its jagged claws. The day before I was set to leave for his funeral, I received a letter in the mail. The address it was sent from was Uncle Jeremy's P.O. box. I'd assumed he'd left something in his will for me, but as I unsealed the letter, I found a single piece of paper. Written in blood was the same circle Uncle Jeremy and I had found carved on the other side of the cabin walls, the lines drawn across it just as jagged. I looked to the top of the circle, the same two names were written out. Only this time, one was crossed out, Uncle Jeremy's. At that second I heard faint scratching from the other side of my house in Idaho. I don't know how, but one of them found me. Story 3: Don't go into the forest after sundown. My husband and I live in a house that's somewhat secluded. Our neighbors aren't the type you can just say hi to over the fence, and a large, thick forest backs our property. For the past year that we have lived here, I have gone on a run along the forest path almost every morning. My husband likes to sleep in, whereas I've always enjoyed my early rises. Last week, we went to a friend's birthday party and were out late. I ended up sleeping in and missing my morning run. I had a few chores to do, and by the time 5 p.m. rolled around, I decided I wasn't going to miss my run that day. I stepped out onto the back porch and took a deep breath as the sun was beginning to set on the horizon. My husband stepped out and gave me a lazy smile before he kissed me on the cheek. I told him I'd be back before it was dark and headed off. It started off like any other run. I take the same path each day. It's a little overgrown, but still obvious enough and easy to follow. I was only about 10 minutes in and I started to notice something. It was quiet, eerily quiet. Normally I can hear birds, leaves in the breeze, and bugs chirping. But it was just complete silence apart from my own breathing and heart beating in my chest. I found it creepy, but shrugged it off as something to do with the timing of the day. The next strange thing happened only a few minutes later. There's a part of the path that wraps around this massive gum tree, the type that you can't see around when you stand in front of it. Well, I reached that part of the path and it was gone. Completely gone. Not like someone chopped it down and there was a stump or a hole in the ground left. It was like the tree never existed in the first place. There was grass and fallen leaves in its place. It looked like any other part of the forest floor, untouched for years. I was starting to get a bit freaked out. I run this path every day. I know this tree is meant to be here. I remember the first time I saw it, I was in awe at the size. I made my husband come for a walk with me the next day so I could show him too, and he was also impressed by the sheer scale of it. It didn't make any sense that it had quite literally vanished. Even if someone was going to chop it down, I wondered if it was even possible to do it in such a short amount of time. I only just saw it the day before on my usual morning run. The practical, logistic part of my mind came to the conclusion it must have been chopped down. I decided I would wait to talk to my husband about it when I got back and maybe even bring him with me to have a look the next day. Maybe he would have an obvious answer that I was missing. Perhaps I could contact the council and ask them about it. I shook it off and continued along the path. As I continued running, I started to get this off feeling in my stomach. Something just didn't feel right, but I didn't know what it was. After a while, I noticed that the sun was setting. Fast. I was losing light quickly, which didn't make any sense. I only left at 5 p.m. The sun wasn't due to set until almost 7 and I had only been gone about 20 minutes. I looked at my watch and sure enough, 5:23 p.m. I checked my phone and it said the same. Just to be sure, I opened up the weather app and checked the sunset, 6:46 p.m. I was standing in almost darkness staring at my phone in total confusion. I had no idea what was going on and it was scaring the crap out of me. I knew the trees would make it dimmer than out in the open, but this was different. I decided enough was enough and I was just going to cut my run short and head home. I turned around and began running back the way I came. After about another 10 minutes of running, I was stopped in my tracks and I felt my heart almost stop. There, standing on the path staring directly at me was a moose. Those things are insanely huge. But the weirdest part about it all was I live in Australia. We have just about every deadly animal on the planet, but we sure as hell don't have moose wandering around, and I certainly had never seen one in the last year I had been coming through the forest. I stared at this creature for what felt like an eternity, my heartbeat pounding in my head as my mind raced. It just stood there, eyes glowing in the dark, staring into my soul. I was frozen in fear, unsure of what I should do. Then, after I felt like I was going to throw up from fear, it finally broke eye contact and just walked away. I stared as it strolled out of sight as if nothing had happened. Once I could no longer hear the footsteps and I was back in complete silence, I began sprinting. I was way too terrified to be in this forest a second longer than I had to be. I ran and ran until my lungs felt like they were going to give out. I thought for sure I should be reaching the clearing soon, but the more I ran, the more it felt like I went deeper and deeper into the woods. I glanced at my watch and my breath hitched. 9:42 p.m. It's not possible, I said to myself. It can't have been 4 hours. My whole interaction with the moose, although felt like forever, in reality only lasted a few minutes. I pulled out my phone, and again it matched what my watch said. I tried to call my husband, but I couldn't get any service. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. It was pitch black now and I had to use my phone torch to illuminate the path. My mind was racing with some kind of way to come up with how this could be happening, but I had nothing. I decided all I could do was keep following the path and hope that soon enough I would come out and be home. I was exhausted from running for so long, so I walked for a while, constantly checking my phone to see if I got any reception to try and call somebody. I knew that I should have been out of the forest by now. I was trying my best to stay calm, but I was panicking internally. Suddenly I froze with fear when I heard a deafening, guttural scream in the distance. I had never felt so sick in the stomach. My heart was pounding in my chest and I felt like I was about to pass out. It was unlike anything I had ever heard. It didn't sound human, but I couldn't think of any kind of animal that makes that noise either. I turned the flash off my phone. For some reason, standing in complete darkness felt safer to me at that moment. I didn't dare move as I intently listened for any more noise. Not a sound, not even a cricket or a breeze. The scream came from behind, and so I decided all I could do was keep moving and hopefully get further away. I'd heard online that mountain lions make terrifying screaming noises, but again, to the best of my knowledge, there are none in Australia and certainly not in my area. Either way, I was not interested in finding out, so I picked up my pace as I continued down the never-ending path. Then, I heard it again. Only this time it was much louder, meaning only one thing: it was getting closer. I broke into a full sprint, the adrenaline burst giving me the extra energy I didn't know I had. I ran for as long as I physically could before I had to slow down to catch my breath. I glanced at my watch again, 1:05 a.m. I let out a short laugh in disbelief. I closed my eyes and rubbed my temples as I took a few deep breaths. I was too afraid to stay still, so I began walking again. The forest felt never-ending. There was no sign of a clearing or anything that looked familiar. No matter how much I moved, I just seemed to go deeper and deeper into the thick woods. I no longer even had a path. I was stepping over branches and bushes, trying my best not to trip. I was watching the ground for so long I forgot to look ahead of me, and when I did, that was when I saw him. Or rather, it. Standing just a few meters from me, I could make out the figure of a pale person with their back facing me. I should have been thrilled to see another person, but for some reason their presence irked me, and right before I was about to blurt out something, I stopped myself. It was hard to make out many details in the dark. My eyes had somewhat adjusted, but from what I could see, he was just standing there, facing the other way, seemingly doing nothing. He looked bald, and I struggled to make out any clothes on his body. As I was studying him, that's when it happened. His head slowly turned until it was facing me. My breathing stopped when I saw its face. Instead of human eyes, it had two large black circles that looked like mini abysses. It had no nose and a mouth that matched its empty eyes. When I didn't think it could get more terrifying, the creature slowly began to stand, and I realized it was actually squatting initially. I watched in frozen terror as the creature's long, skinny legs came into view, right as it dropped its freakishly long, skinny arms at the same time. It must have been more than 10 feet tall. Once the creature had fully stood up, it turned towards me. I was too scared to move, to think, to breathe. All I could do was watch. It stared at me for a moment before dropping its jaw to let out the most unearthly, thunderous roar you could imagine. This was enough to snap me out of my frozen state of terror. I turned on my heel and sprinted in the opposite direction of the creature. My chest was burning as I ran as fast as I could. I refused to look behind me, but I could hear the thumping legs following behind me. I had no sense of direction, no plan. All I could do was run. I still couldn't see them well, and so I hadn't seen the edge until it was too late, rolling and toppling down a steep hill until I landed in the thick brush at the bottom. I groaned in pain, winded from the fall. I blinked a few times before looking up at the ledge I had just fallen from, where the creature suddenly appeared. My eyes widened and my heart raced as it looked around. I thought for sure this was it. There's no chance I can outrun this thing in my state. Just as I was reflecting on all the things in life I had missed out on, the creature turned away and walked back into the trees, out of sight. I let out the breath I didn't realize I was holding on to. The bushes must have swallowed me up enough so that it didn't see me. I checked my watch again, 4:59 a.m. After laying there for a few minutes to catch my breath, I slowly sat up, wiping the tears from my eyes as I could finally think for a moment. When I felt ready enough, I rose to my feet and looked around. I then noticed a path, a very familiar path. It was the one I ran every day. I began following it, hoping and praying with every step that my ordeal would finally be over. After a while, the forest started getting thinner, trees more spaced out, until finally I could see a clearing with light. I audibly gasped as I quickened my pace into a full sprint towards the opening, and when I came out on the other side, I could see the sunrise. Tears filled my eyes as I saw my house in the distance, and I continued running until I got to the back door. I burst into the house and saw my husband sitting in the living room with a mug in his hand. He turned and gave me a puzzled look when he saw me. "You all right?" he asked. I stared at him in disbelief. Why was he not more concerned? Why hadn't he been out looking for me? "Are you joking? I've been gone all night. I got lost tonight. So many crazy things happened. The time went all weird and dash." "All night? What are you talking about? You were gone for like 20 minutes. He responded, totally bewildered by my shouting. "But the sun is rising. I just saw it when I was coming back." I gasped, still trying to catch my breath. "No, that's the sunset." He rose and came over to me, concern on his face. He pulled out his phone and pointed at the lock screen. "Look, 5:24 p.m. You were gone for less than half an hour." Story 2. 13 years ago, I went mute and I am finally able to talk about what happened. From a young age, I was an extroverted and a stubborn girl. Although I always listened to my parents, but that time, at 12 years, I felt rebellious. My neighborhood held a Girl Scout camp. Every year, my parents didn't allow me to go, but this time I felt old enough, which was my first mistake. Me and Kelly, my best friend, begged our parents, but they refused because they are responsible adults who cared about us. But to us, 12-year-olds, they seemed like monsters. So, I made a plan. We told our parents that we are going to Katie's house for a sleepover. They talked to Katie's parents, and we did stay at Katie's for approximately 12 minutes, and then we left for our epic camping trip. Kelly decided on the place, Lunenburg Woods, and that was our second mistake. Kelly and I have been best friends ever since we were little. Recently it was her birthday, and I gifted her a unicorn bracelet which she never took off. Our neighborhood is surrounded by woods. The Girl Scout camp took place in the eastern part of Westria Forest, so we were quite far away. We didn't really have any camping gear, just 2 pillows, a blanket, a small Barbie tent, a flashlight, and some snacks enough for a day. We rode our cycles from Katie's to the woods. At first, everything seemed nice. We heard birds chirping and cars go by. The weather was nice and warm. We saw squirrels and rabbits jumping around. But as we went on, the forest grew thicker. We were tired of running around, so we sat under a dark shaded tree. We ate our snacks, and I tried to scare Kelly, but what will happen next terrifies me to the core. As we started walking down the wrecked trail again, we couldn't hear or see any animals. The only sounds we could hear were of the rustling of the leaves. There was an eerie presence in the woods. I felt uncomfortable and suffocated. And then there was a sudden cloudburst. It felt like the whole woods were closing in on us. An ominous feeling wrapped around me. The trees looked like tall, intimidating creatures. The peal of thunder startled us, and both of us ran for shelter. In a state of panic, I realized that Kelly was missing. Fog surrounded me, so I couldn't see anything, but I could feel she wasn't here. After I calmed down, I investigated my surroundings and scouted for Kelly. As I said before, where I live was quite warm, but here it felt like it dropped about 10 degrees. Anyway, while walking down the path, I noticed something. It was iron. As far as I know, that wasn't natural. Why would there be human-made stuff so deep in the forest? I walked closer to it, and in betwixt of the fog I saw an iron staircase. It seemed new, polished, and untouched by nature, almost as though time had stopped for it. It seemed like someone had cut the stairs from a house and put them here. I was so mesmerized by them that it didn't even register to me that all the sounds were blocked off. At this point, I could hear nothing but my own breath. Looking at the stairs, I felt an unexplained morbid feeling to climb up them. At that time, I felt like it was a must to climb. I had no choice. So I did. I started climbing them. With each step, I felt disconnected from reality. Nothing mattered. Eventually, I couldn't even hear my own breathe, or was I not breathing? You may think that creepy sounds and screams are scary, but I know. Silence, dead silence, is the most terrifying thing that could destroy a person. This type of silence will make your skin crawl and make you want to rip your ears out. There was only the final step left between me and whatever lies beyond. The last thing that I could recollect was feeling a push. That's it. I fell and lost consciousness. When I woke up, it was still pouring, even heavier than before. After I made sense of what was happening, I felt like being watched. Then I heard my name, Rebecca, in a low, distorted voice. It didn't sound human. I got up and looked around and saw the thing that haunts my dreams. Every last thread of hope was shredded by this deep despair. What I saw was a thing so horrifying that I can't even begin to describe it. It was tall and had 2 dark holes for eyes, a huge distorted grin which stretched from one side to the other. It had huge limbs with sharp claws covered with disgusting blood. I was petrified looking at it. It continued to say my name in a now childlike voice. It began to walk towards me, repeating my name in the same disturbing voice. In a state of panic, I searched for a weapon and my eyes landed on a piece of wood. Without thinking, I swung the piece of wood, hitting it until it was a bloody mess. After I realized what I had done, I ran away. I kept running and running. In my attempt at escaping that demon, I barely noticed the sounds of the woods. Panting and gasping for air, I finally made it out and dashed to my home away from the deathly forest. I broke in and started crying hysterically. Kelly's parents, the Adams, were also there talking with my parents. All of them shared the look of despair on their faces. There were cookies on the coffee table which were untouched. My once sugar-loving parents were now anxiously making phone calls. My angsty teenage brother was actually out of his room and nervously listening to the conversation. Kelly's mom, Mrs. Adams, who once was a fashion diva and always wore makeup, was rough and sobbing, and even Mr. Adams, the most cheerful person I knew, was on the verge of tears. When their eyes met mine, they were completely taken aback. Mom threw everything, including the expensive new cell phone, and ran towards me. They hugged me so tightly that it was hard to breathe. All my anxiety faded away when my mom brushed the dirt off my face. For a second everything was roses and butterflies until I saw the look on Mr. and Mrs. Adams' faces. I could feel hope blossoming in their hearts. Their hope was like a beautiful stained glass window which was shattered by the despairing news of the absence of their daughter. When they questioned me about Kelly, my silence gave them the answer. I could see the color drain out of their faces. The forest rangers searched the entire forest until they came across a battered mess which DNA confirmed to be Kelly. It seemed she was beaten repeatedly with a blunt object. She seemed like an unrecognized pile of flesh. Kelly, who once was a high-spirited girl, obsessed with unicorns and nature, was now a part of the soil. We identified her because of the bracelet I gifted her, which was also covered with blood. Nearby, they found a piece of wood covered with the blood of Kelly, which was likely the murder weapon. There was no trace of fingerprints, footprints, or any other evidence due to the torrential rain, giving an upper hand to the culprit. Now, even after 13 years, they couldn't identify the perpetrator of this crime. I've told this traumatic tale to many, but there's one detail I always fail to mention. After hitting the monster, my eyes laid upon the lifeless body of my best friend, Kelly Adams. Story: my father is a park ranger. He took me with him on the night shift. I should have listened to his rules. This is how the human mind works. When you're walking through a forest, you don't think too much. You just let the silence surround you, feel the soft breeze and the branches crack under your feet. It's in our nature to yearn for such scenery. No matter how much we thrive in busy, concrete-soaked cities, forests are always welcoming and refreshing to us. The air is clear and crisp, and daylight plays hide and seek through the tall branches. It's inspiring and beautiful. Sometimes, though, as you walk on your path, your mind begins to focus on small things, noises, gusts of wind, shadows in the trees. Such silence can be both welcoming and unsettling, depends on how you view it. Forests are double-sided coins. They hide you away from the tiring city landscape, but expose you to another environment. You're not in control anymore, because this is not your home. You can lie to yourself and build a house there, but you don't belong in a forest. You're merely a visitor. That's national parks for you, an illusion of being in control. The fake freedom you feel when you walk on those marked paths and camp in the square assigned to you, when you think the silence around you is peaceful, but even the silence is an illusion. Visit a forest again, even when it's silent. Is it, really? It's not. Complete, absolute silence means death. Fear it. My father taught me that. He's a park ranger, and he's been doing this job since forever. I wasn't much of a fan of national parks, especially because most of the time there's no service and the hikes are killing me. I'd rather enjoy nature by swimming in a lake or skiing. Why break your legs to end up to a high point just to see a random valley? Not to mention the animals, they were everywhere, and the insects always got on my nerves. I never understood his love for the forest. I guess that was one of the reasons why he started telling me scary stories from his night shift. Looking back, they were obviously made up, but to younger me, they seemed believable. I used to think he was so brave for working the night shift. As I got older, I got into horror, and even if I didn't believe in his forest creatures anymore, I still liked the idea of spending the night in a small cabin in the middle of nowhere, just for that dose of adrenaline. When my father said he wanted to take me with him, I accepted immediately. I knew why he offered. See, over the past years, our relationship had taken a big hit. I guess I was growing up and he didn't know how to handle that. He'd become emotionally distant and seemed to repel any of my tries to open up to him. In return, I'd become uninterested and irritable. In the words of my mother, this would have been a fun way to bond, I guess. We arrived at the park around 9 p.m. His shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. His jeep pierced through the darkness and ventured into the woods. The headlights flashed the trees, turning them white against the black sky. I'd never been on this route, but, again, my visits to the park were rare. We drove for a while. Most of the time, people underestimate the size of national parks. It took us an hour and a half to get to the cabin, which wasn't even in the heart of the forest. I saw it, one single trace of humanity in the middle of nowhere, a tiny, wooden cabin with flickering light bulbs and watchdogs. Before we got out of the car, my father stopped me. Listen, there's some instructions you need to follow here. I know it might seem unimportant, but they're crucial. Then, he handed me a piece of paper. A list of handwritten rules. At first, they were ordinary. Don't go out alone in the park. Don't leave food out, etc. I thought the rest of the rules had been put there just to freak me out. Dad, I'm not 12 anymore. You can't freak me out with this shit. I'm not trying to. You wanted to come here with me, so act accordingly. What even is this? If you see a man without an arm, don't help him. We have all kinds of weirdos around here. And this? If the whistling is near you, it means they're far. My father smiled, but his eyes didn't. Some of these are added by superstitious fellas. It's more of a what if. It's not gonna happen to you. Don't go out alone in the park. Always have a working contact device. Don't leave marked paths unless instructed to or with proper equipment. Don't leave food out and lock the trash bins. Always keep on the whistle and the badge. If you see a man without an arm, don't help him. Your family is not in here. Remember, there is no reason for you to hear their voices from outside. Lock your car doors, even when you are driving. Check the marks on the trees. There's only 3 types of marks, all triangles. Red, yellow, and green. Other marks are not ours. Don't follow them. If the whistling is near you, it means they're far. If it's far away, it means they're near. Beware of dead blue. What is dead blue? I asked. My father sighed. You know when you're out in the woods, when you think what you hear is silence, but you realize there's dozens of sounds around you, from birds to crickets to leaves rustling. Yeah, that's because there's no such thing as silence. Absolute silence. Never. There's always sound. Movement. Life. Dead blue is complete and utter silence. That's our, code name for it. Death-inducing silence. Unnatural. Right. And when that happens, it won't. But if it does. He paused, staring at the steering wheel. Then his head turned to me. His eyes darted from mine to the window behind me. You leave. That being said, he got out of the car and I followed. The cabin was dusty and cramped, I couldn't understand how he could spend 8 hours in here. He had a small TV, but it wasn't working, a desk, and a mini fridge. You sit here all alone? I asked. Yeah. Why, that freak you out? Don't you get bored? Martin's post is 10 minutes away. Sometimes I just drive over. Nothing really happens out here anyway. My spot is pretty far from the campsites. I just have to patrol from time to time to make sure no one wanders off into the night, but that rarely happens. This is one of the wilder areas, less explored. You haven't explored it all. His eyes sparkled. Wouldn't be possible. So you don't know what's out there. That's the fun of it. You said you wanted adrenaline. There you go. I nodded. He opened the mini fridge and threw me some juice. Orange juice. I'd mentioned I liked this brand once, and he'd remembered. Maybe our relationship wasn't so bad. We sat next to each other in the small cabin. Dad locked it. I'm not gonna lie to you, most of the time I just sleep. Literally nothing ever happens. So you really didn't see any creatures out there, like the ones you told me about when I was little? I jokingly asked. The only creature out there is my manager, and I'd rather face a million cryptids than talk to him. I laughed. I leaned in to look out the windows. I can't see anything. Just my reflection. Want me to dim down the light? Yeah. He did, and darkness crept inside the tiny cabin. The woods became more prominent, more vivid. The light made by the moon was unbelievable, and the stars were actually visible compared to the polluted city. The cabin was on a hill, propped up a tree, with a trapdoor and a ladder leading to our car. We could actually see above the tree line, into the valley. We spent the first hours talking. Somewhere around midnight, I began dozing off. I didn't want to, but I caved in and fell asleep with my head on the desk. He woke me up. I rubbed my eyes in confusion. What time is it? I got a call from Martin. Right. Who was Martin? I mumbled. The other one in the area. He says he got a call from the campsite and someone's missing. We need to go search for him. We? As in us? Yeah. You'll stay in the back seat. I'm on the phone with Martin right now. I could hear Martin's muffled voice through the speaker. Wait, don't take the kid. Why not? He'll stay in the car. Paul, it could be one of those nights. We won't get out of the car. You can't guarantee that. Well, I can't leave him here. Alone. In the dark. A pause followed. Look, Paul, I understand you wanted to do a take your kid to work day, but I don't know about this one. It could be dangerous. We're literally just going to drive around for a bit. It's fine. Leave him in the cabin. Dad put his hand over one of the speakers, so I didn't understand what Martin told him. His eyes kept darting to the window behind me. He sighed. Martin will come pick me up. You are staying here, locked. Turn the lights off and wait for me to return. It's gonna take a minute and you'll be safe here. What? I'm not staying here alone. What did Martin tell you to change your mind? It doesn't matter. I'll return in maximum half an hour. You can go back to sleep if you want. Or I can call you and we can talk. I was afraid. Truly afraid. I did not want to show it, especially after I'd complained that nothing interesting happened around there, so I reluctantly agreed. My dad opened the trapdoor and climbed down the ladder, then his face disappeared into the darkness. I saw Martin's car pick him up and drive away. Silence followed. I wished I'd been home, in my bed. Instead, I sat stiff on the chair and waited. And waited. I began imagining the worst. What if they'd crashed? What if a bear had found them? I didn't want to let my fear get the best of me, but I thought about his legends and the set of rules. I hoped the writers were just paranoid. At around 2 a.m., I heard a knock on the shack door. I felt my chest tighten. Another knock followed. I wanted to respond, but something in me didn't allow me to. Then, I heard my dad's voice. "Kev, open. It's cold out here." It echoed through the cabin. My eyes were dry from the lack of sleep, but my mind was fully awake. I stared at the phone. Then, at the shack door. "Kev, open, please. I know you're there. I saw you at the window." I turned off the light completely. I don't know why I had this urge, but if my dad could see me from the window, anyone could. Or anything. And I didn't like to be on display like that. "You don't have a key. It locks from the inside." "Shit, yeah. How was it? Did you find him?" "Yeah, we did. He was drunk off his ass. We helped him return to his friends. Could have been a lot worse." As I was talking to him, I searched for the keys in the drawer. It was strange, because I hadn't heard anyone climbing the ladder. Or seen Martin's car drive my dad back to the cabin. "How did you get here, without Martin?" "What do you mean?" "Open up, Kev, I'm freezing." A answered the question. "He did drive me here. Didn't see any headlights. They were off, to not draw the attention of animals." "Bullshit." I pulled out the crumpled piece of paper. 6. Your family is not in here. Remember, there is no reason for you to hear their voices from outside. My hand was shaking so bad, I could barely grab the phone. I skimmed through my contacts. Kdef, Kana. Dad. I called him. The phone was ringing, yet no sound came from beneath the shack door. My dad picked up. "Anything okay?" In the blinding darkness of the cabin, surrounded by the howling wind, I toned my voice down to a whisper. "Dad, someone out there is pretending to be you." A long pause followed. When he spoke, his voice was trembling. "Don't open. Turn off the lights." "Did you turn them off when I told you?" I turned them off now." "No, you should have turned them off when I left." "I'm sorry." "It's fine. Don't talk to it." "Did you talk to it?" Guilt crept up my spine. I don't know why, but I lied. "I did not." "Good. Stay put. I'm coming after you." "But what if the thing sees you?" "You'll have to face it. We have ways to distract them." "It's fine. Don't be scared." I lied again. "I'm not." "Good. I love you. I'm coming." I wasn't scared for me. I was scared for him. The voice from below continued. "Kev, please open. Please. It's cold." I didn't answer. Knocks followed. The voice went on. "Did you talk to someone on the phone?" "Kev, I lost my phone in the woods. Whoever is out there and has my phone is not me. It's not me. It's not me." It kept repeating. "It's not me. It's not me." I began feeling lightheaded. Fear is one thing, but this was a combination of anxiety, stress, and guilt. I tried to control my breaths, but to no avail. The cabin was spinning around me. "It's not me. It's 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 not me. Shut up. Shut up." And it did. Silence followed. I pulled out the list again and started reading and rereading the rules, like a lunatic. I kept listening for noises from outside. The wind was still going. Good. No dead blue. Then, I heard a loud thud from my wall. Another followed, and another. It sounded like footsteps. They moved to the roof of the cabin. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Whatever was out there was now climbing around my cabin. I could hear the scratching outside. I started to cry and covered my mouth with my hand. I just wanted my dad. I wished I could see his face again. The universe, somehow, ironically responded because my dad's face suddenly appeared at one of the windows. He raised his hand and knocked. I stared at him through my eyebrows, my head tilted. Scarcely breathing, I remained still. He kept knocking. That wasn't my dad. The cabin was tied to a tree at around 10 meters from the ground. He could not be at the window. The creature knocked and knocked, and for what seemed like an eternity, we just made eye contact. Blood was dripping from one of its nostrils. Another phone call woke me from my trance. "Kevin, are you there? Are you in the cabin?" "Yes. And the thing looks like you. And it's at the window. I'm coming right now. I'll shoot it. Don't worry. I'm just about to turn a corner. Dad, I'm really scared for you. Martin's coming, too. It's okay." Truly, in a few minutes, Martin's car pulled up. I cried in relief. The thing turned its head to look, then back to me. It opened its mouth wide and, using its fingers, pulled the corners upwards to form a smile, then jumped into the woods, into the darkness. Gunshots followed. After a few silent minutes, I called my dad. He picked up. "Where are you?" I asked. "I'm coming to get you." I saw him walk towards the cabin, then heard him climb up the stairs. I unlocked the trapdoor and hugged him tight. "What was that?" "Please, tell me we're going home." "We are." "I'm so sorry. I should have never put you through this. Come on." As we walked towards our car, my blood ran cold. It was not something I'd seen or heard, but the opposite. See, the wind had stopped. The crickets had stopped. Dead blue. I sprinted to the car, got into the driver's seat, then locked the doors. My dad was standing in front of the car, confused. That's when I got a text, and I hit the gas. I ran him over, then turned the car around and sped up into the night. I barely knew how to work it out, since I didn't have my license, but I left as quick as possible. Behind me, a car followed. When I got to the nearest checkpoint, I stopped. The car was Martin's. He got out, alone. "Where's my dad?" I asked. He, took an ATV to get you. Said he'd get there faster. I texted him to turn around and that you were safe. The text he'd sent me. Martin and I split up. He may get there faster than me, and if he does, he'll text me to turn and head to the checkpoint. There is no one with Martin. He's alone. I thought I'd unlocked the trap door to my dad when he'd actually taken an ATV and turned to the checkpoint. The thing I'd ran over wasn't my dad, and I'd known it since I felt that unnerving silence. However, no one at the checkpoint had seen my father. As I'm typing this, I'm afraid for him, but a part of me knows he's alive. Maybe he took another route or got lost. Whatever he did, I'll find him. While I tell you what happened, please keep one thing in mind. Stay away from the forest. Forget everything that I told you the last time about recreation and nature and all that. It's not worth it. It really isn't. I didn't want to say it, but deep down I knew. It was my fault that my dad was missing. No matter what cryptic creatures roamed the park, he'd been safe until I showed up. Through me, he'd showed them he had a weakness. And they fed on his fear. Now, it was possible I would never see him again, and it was all my fault. I knew it. I just chose to bury it deep down in my chest and let it sink deeper in my stomach, a knot that would never disappear. As I was sitting there, at the checkpoint, covered in a blanket and shivering from the stress, Martin approached me. As much as I wanted to ask him about the park, the rules, my dad, something inside me didn't know whether to trust him or not. Was he the real Martin? He sat down next to me. "I'm sorry." The night was still cold and unwelcoming. The trees stood tall and sober in front of us, crowned by the dark, never-ending sky. No stars, just a black, soulless night. Maybe clouds had rolled in. I kept thinking of how 4 hours ago I'd been searching for constellations with my dad. What do you mean? I'm sorry for your dad. Don't say that. You say it like he's dead. Martin didn't answer and didn't look at me either. I turned my body towards him. He's not dead. He isn't. Martin remained silent. Then, without thinking, I punched his arm. He pulled away and frowned. It's not my fault. He shouldn't have brought you here. Tell me everything you know about this stupid park. I deserve it. You owe it to me, and it's the only way I can actually find him. He stared at me for a while, and so long had passed until his response that I thought he had decided not to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was toned down to a whisper. We thought they were lying. Both me and Paul and the others. When we got hired here, we heard the stories, the legends and everything, but assumed those were horror stories passed around. We didn't stop to listen and didn't believe anything until we saw it with our own eyes. See, this park is huge. Huge, and no one ever bothered to explore it. I thought they lacked the resources, but now I see they were just afraid. He stopped to look around. It would be ridiculous of him to hide from anyone right now. Why would he feel ashamed of telling me these? I thought, but then realized he was probably looking around himself to stay aware not of someone, but of something. That's the thing. Even when you've been face to face with the supernatural, your mind still searches for a logical explanation. We started writing down the occurrences, trying to find a pattern or a way to avoid them. We thought that, if we wrote down those rules, we might be able to not get inconvenienced much. He wiped his face with his hand. We never knew this could happen. None of us had ever disappeared. We just thought the worst they could do was annoy us, creep us out, hurt us. He was sweating, even if it was freezing outside. He kept shaking his head. People always refused to believe he'd never actually seen anything. I sighed. I felt too alert to let my guard down and cry, but I craved it. Why do you let tourists here? Campers. They only care about those who wander off. They search for it in your soul. The desire to get lost. And then they help you. A shiver ran down my spine for no reason. I hugged myself, then sneezed. I need your help to find him. Tomorrow morning. No, Martin. He could get hurt. I turned towards the dark mass of trees. He's out there, alone, now. Who's out there? Said a woman, coming out of the cabin. My dad. He's missing. She frowned, then looked at Martin. Which post? 62, he replied. Shit. That's my next shift. I could look for him with you, if you want. I'll take my car and go to the post. Tell you if anything shows up. Martin looked back at the cozy cabin, warmly lit, then to the dark woods. With a sigh, he stood up and started walking to his car. I followed. He locked the car doors, and then I called my dad. My heart was beating so fast, I thought it would break free from my chest. No answer. I took a deep breath. Right. We should, look for his ATV first. We drove back to his post, then we started checking the other paths around the main road. His ATV couldn't have gotten too far. We found it parked in front of a big oak tree, but no trace of my dad. The trees surrounding it made it impossible for the car to pass through, so we came to the grim conclusion that we had to get out and search for him by foot. We ran over the rules one more time, to be sure. No weird markings. Dead blue. Whistling, loved ones, one-armed man. Got it. I held on to Martin's arm as we sunk deeper into the dark trees, our flashlights throwing out more shadows than usual. Calling out for him. begging him to come out. I yelled his name over and over until my throat started to hurt. I could feel branches hanging onto my clothes in unnatural, twisted angles. At one point, we stopped dead in our tracks. Ahead of us, behind a tree, something was moving. "Who's that?" "Oh, wouldn't you like to know?" We both froze. "What?" The old lady voice continued. "Who could it be?" It was as if she was hiding behind the tree. One of her bony hands appeared from one side and the other from the other side. She moved them around, tracing the outline of the tree with her fingers. It looked as if she was playing with us to make the tree seem like it had hands. I knew I had to try. "Have you seen my dad?" "Have you seen my face?" she replied instantly. "And no. Would you like to?" I turned to Martin right when the old lady, or whatever it was, jumped from behind the tree. Even though I hadn't seen her face, I could make out how grotesque it looked judging Martin's expression. He fired a few shots, and I heard a wail like nothing else I'd heard before. It felt as if my ears were ripped off. Then, silence. "I don't think this is safe, Kev." "No shit. I'm sorry about your dad, but I'm sure he's fine if we just search for him in daylight." "No, he could die by then. Every moment is precious." I thought Martin was looking at me angry, but I realized two things. One, he wasn't looking at me, but behind me, and two, he wasn't angry, but confused. "Kev, don't move." Right in that moment, I heard a whistle far in the distance. If the whistling is near you, it means they're far. If it's far away, it means they're near. I opened my mouth to scream, but right in that instant, as Martin reached for me, I blacked out. When I woke up, I had a terrible headache. I was still in the woods, but Martin was gone, and so was his car. I felt incredibly drained, and my hands were shaking so bad, I could barely lift them up. I started walking back to my dad's ATV, hoping I could take it and move on with my search. I checked the time, but something else stood out on my phone. The date. It was 1 day later. I'd been in the woods for a whole day. My head foggy, my body stiff, I got on the ATV and figured out how to start it, then drove back to the main road and to my father's post. I could see the light on and make out a silhouette. I stopped, studying its outline. It looked like it had only one arm. If you see a man without an arm, don't help him. It was too late. He'd seen me and was climbing down the ladder. I got back on the ATV and drove away. Right when I was halfway through, I ran out of gas. Behind me, footsteps. "Kid, hold on. I see you met my wife earlier. What a fine woman she is." My head was pulsating. "Don't fucking come near me. Come on. You want to find your dad or not? You wouldn't know where he is." Bullshit. I spoke to him this morning. Rage filled me and replaced the fear. I got down and turned to the old man, who had been limping behind me, and hit him. "Don't speak about him. Don't you dare." The old man laughed, and I saw his only tooth staring back at me. I pushed him away and started running back to the post. I ran and ran and ran without looking back until my limbs ached of a pain I'd never known before. I got to the post and climbed up the ladder, then locked the shack door and called my mother, who was worried sick about me. I barely managed to get a word out before I collapsed from exhaustion. When I woke up, morning was creeping in. I called my dad one more time. The phone rang a few times. "Yeah. Kev." Tears gathered in my eyes. My throat hurt to speak, but I did. "Dad? Dad, is that you? Where are you?" "Kev, get out of the forest. They'll let me go. They want you." It didn't make any sense. I stared at the floor, phone in hand, speechless. "What do you mean? Where exactly are you?" "Kev, don't come after me." I can't do that. I can't just leave you there. I could make out heavy breathing on the other side of the phone. Dad, just tell me where you are. I won't come after you. I promise. I'll be safe. At the checkpoint. I'll send Martin. His voice was trembling. I don't know where I am. I've never been on this side of the forest. I think it's somewhere east. Do you see any markings on the trees? Yeah, but none of the good ones. These markings aren't ours. These markings aren't ours. I paused, and so did he. I had my phone to my right ear, and suddenly, someone whistled right next to my left, startling me. I took a deep breath. Relax. It means they're far. There's something else, my dad said. The cabin felt cold, and yet I was sweating, suffering from an unexplainable fever. I could barely hold the phone anymore. Kev, I'm not alone here. Something else is with me. I can't get out either. It feels like I'm walking in a circle, back and forth, and I'm afraid to go too far. It's as if it's guarding me. It doesn't want me to get out. I heard another whistle to my left, only this time it didn't feel like it was directly into my ear anymore. They're getting closer. Right. I have to go. I wanted to hang up, but my hand wasn't listening to me. I just let the phone fall to the ground. In the reflection of the window, I saw myself, pale, dark veins under my eyes, and dry lips. What was going on? I felt like puking. I kneeled, then started rocking back and forth, unsure what to do, how to play this out. I knew that was surely my dad, because the creatures can't talk on the phone, but I didn't know where he was, and something inside me told me they wouldn't let him go unless I personally went out to look for him. I didn't know whether Martin would help me again, and, judging by how fast he'd left me alone there, it didn't seem like he was too eager to reach out. My stomach turned, and my chest tightened as I puked on the floor of the cabin. The next minutes were a blur. I remember my hands, and my knees crawling to the chat, then basically falling down the ladder and breaking my ankles on the ground, then trying to stand up, and failing. I remained laying on the leaves, staring at the sky. I could just fall asleep here. Forever. Another whistle to my left, this time, further away. I didn't have much time until they found me again. Hey. Kid. Fuck no. So soon. I lifted myself from the ground enough to look at whoever was coming. It was the lady from the checkpoint. The one who said her shift was about to start. I mean, that's how it looked. I didn't know whether it was really her. I didn't answer. Just blankly stared at her gray leather boots and ginger ponytail. Are you okay? I stood up. She tried to help me, but I yelled at her not to touch me. Stay away. Now. A look of confusion swept over her face. Where'd you come from? I want to ask you the same thing. What? She smiled, a bit amused. My dad is missing. You find that funny? She scratched her head. Who's your dad? We had this exact same conversation back at the checkpoint with Martin. You should have remembered. I know he's missing, but I don't know his name. I don't know everyone around here, she replied, annoyed. After I had told her, she shook her head. Never heard of him. Why isn't anyone talking about this? Your park rangers just go missing. Hell, I've been here for 2 days now, and you don't seem to even care. What about my mother? Did you talk to her? Did you talk to Martin, since his egoistical ass left me here dash? And Martin didn't come back to the checkpoint, she answered, stoically. After that night, we didn't see him again. I stared at her in disbelief. Take me there. If it's really you. I need to talk to more people. I can't be alone here with you. I understand your dad is missing, but it's not exactly like it's so uncommon around here, and please be polite. Don't let frustration cloud your judgment and make you unnecessarily irritable. Unnecessarily. I have every right to be angry. What do you mean? It's not so uncommon. Martin said no one went missing here. She frowned, tilting her head, then looked away. I was still feeling sick, but at least I could stand on my own legs. Another whistle echoed, this time deep into the woods. Tall trees surrounded us, and the familiar cabin seemed now desolate and rotten. Nothing made sense anymore. Your dad is not the first to go missing. Many went before him, and many will follow. It's not something you can negotiate. It just happens, Martin said. She slowly shook her head. It's not something well known. We don't want to scare our rangers. When I spoke, I sounded choked out. Who else went missing? She hesitated. Silence filled the space between us, and I could tell she was uncomfortable. I didn't give her time to finish. I'd been running for so long that my legs had gone numb. Hitting my shoulders on tree trunks and struggling not to trip and roll on the ground, I felt like running was the only thing that could save me. Deep into the forest, I wondered how long someone could go without water or food. At some point, I stopped to sit down. I couldn't take it anymore. My heart was literally telling me that if I didn't stop soon, it would. The moment I sat on the moss, I realized I wasn't alone. I swallowed. I swear to God. In front of me sat the ginger lady. Go away, please. Leave me alone. I just want to help. I don't believe you. I went missing a long time ago. I don't remember what I was doing, patrolling around, I think. Anyway, Post 62 is notorious for interesting stuff happening around. 62, 24, 46, they're not haunted, generally speaking, but energy points. And as far as I know, they come from the earth. They're corpses. Forests used to be humanity's cemeteries and ritual dumpsters in general. I don't know what went on around here, but these woods have swallowed so much blood. It's like mass, this blood. This death. The more it gathers, it creates this gravity and asks for even more. More blood. More death. She was softly murmuring, as if telling a bedtime story. I saw those markings, and even if I didn't recognize them, I was ashamed to call and ask. I thought they'd been part of my training, and not recognizing them would have made me look bad. Back then, no rules were written down. She sighed. Anyway, I came to this clearing in the woods, and, well, I don't remember how I died. All I know is that I was following my mom's voice. I don't remember how it sounds like now. How long have you been there for? She ignored my question. You are still alive. You could leave. I want to, well, tell you it's not that bad here. She smiled, but her eyes didn't. There's always something to do here. They're always looking for another. I shook my head as she nodded. Okay. Well, you're looking for your dad. I think you already know what you need to do. Look behind you. I did. Behind me, a blue triangle. Almost fluorescent. When I turned back to her, she was gone. I walked and walked, each step muffled by the damp earth and fallen leaves. You know, I'd never been in such woods before. They didn't feel alive in the usual way, millions of little lives roaming around, but they felt like a being of their own, and the earth rose and fell under my feet, almost mocking my breaths. I passed a bridge, then a tunnel in one of these godforsaken mountains. When I got out, I could hear whispers and whistles. How are you? Why, I'm fine. Just a little ravished. Well, wait. It's soon, I believe. I believe, too. Do you believe? Yes. Soon. 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 What was about to happen soon? I tried calling out for my dad, since my phone and flashlight had died, but someone else answered, and it wasn't him, so I decided to keep my mouth shut. I passed through this garden of roses, clinging onto my clothes. Roses are most popular and loved flowers who never miss a chance to draw blood. In the distance, more trees. One of them looked broken. Coming closer, I realized something was hanging from it. Or someone. I didn't recognize their face. I kept walking and saw more. Hanging from the trees, their bare feet floating above my head, looming over me. I stopped looking at their faces, afraid I'd see my dad. Eventually, I reached this hill and smelled something burning. Coming closer, I saw this fire, and Martin. The minute I said that, pain pierced my shoulder. My back hit the tree. I smelled something metallic. "Go away," said Martin. "No, it's me, believe me. I cannot do this now. I already saw you 5 times. I don't believe you anymore." "No. I'm telling the truth." Another razor flew to me, but I dodged it. I started crying and fell to my knees. I told him about the ginger lady, and my dad, and the stars, and my life, in a way that no doppelganger could. They could try to take my life, but they didn't know anything about it. Martin's gaze softened. He sighed. "I saw over 12 sunsets here. I had to kill them to eat. The mimics. I ate their meat. They mimicked my family, loved ones, they even mimicked you. I've killed my family countless times here. Countless." We talked for a while. He told me he didn't want to go any further, because he'd seen a clearing and had a bad feeling, and I understood. At one point, he interrupted me. "Can you hear the fire?" Truly, I heard no rustling. Not of leaves, not the fire. No wind. Dead blue. "Run." I did. With Martin behind me, we ran until the moonlight shone freely, without the burden of the trees. We'd reached the clearing. I stopped, breathless. My dad was laying there, unconscious. I threw myself on the ground and grabbed him, shaking his shoulders. My voice was hoarse, and my eyes stung from the tears. "Wake up, Dad. Wake up, please. Now." He didn't. Suddenly, Martin let out a wail. I turned around and saw him in, some sort of figure over him. I don't know what it was. "Choose." I froze. Someone had whispered right into my left ear. "Choose. One or the other." Martin was yelling. My dad was silent. I understood then and there. "Dad. I choose him. Let him live." Martin's scream stopped, and my dad started coughing behind me. I turned to him and hugged him tight. He was confused and dizzy. Martin, on the other hand, was laying on the cold earth, his eyes open, his skin bruised. Guilt washed over me. However, I didn't have time to process it, because a powerful light shone onto us. A helicopter. I grabbed the ladder without thinking and helped my dad up. The last thing I saw before I looked up was the ginger lady, sitting cross-legged on the grass, next to Martin's body. We were taken back to the entrance of the park. The next hours were filled with questions. About the park. About our disappearance. About Martin's murder. We're now the prime suspects, but I'm just glad I got out, and I know it's because of his sacrifice. However, I'd really like to speak to him again. I can't rest knowing his innocent soul is out there. I plan on giving more updates on my account. There's one other thing. I'd never dare to admit it. Sometimes, when I look at my dad, even weeks after what happened, I wonder if it's really him. Thank you for listening to Night Whispers. If the shadows kept you company tonight, leave a comment. Tell me where in the world you're listening from. And if you're brave enough, like, subscribe, and come back next time. Just don't follow the voice in the trees. Story for the forest. The last winter I saw the old woodcutter, it was desperately cold. Snow fell thick and heavy on the ground, smothering everything in a blanket of icy white. One by one the trees around town were felled, and one by one they were burned to stave off the worst of the cold. Eventually the only trees left belonged to the forest. The forest was a dark and confusing place. We were all warned as children never to wander into its depths, never to harvest its fallen boughs or take an axe to its shadowy trunks. The paths moved, they said, the further in you got. A strange whisper filled the air, not just the rustling of wind through golden leaves, but a low voice almost, though the words were never decipherable. It was understood that the forest was apart in some way. Dangerous. That winter, however, as families shivered in their cottages in front of dwindling fires, the woodcutter headed to the forest. He took a sled dragged behind him and the sharpest axe in his workshop. The townspeople told him not to go, but not with much conviction. They were all freezing after all, and the promise of wood to burn was too tantalizing. The woodcutter's first foray saw him venture to the outermost edge of the trees only. A few of us watched him select a young sapling, right at the boundary line between forest and open field. We waited with bated breath as he raised his axe and then swung it whistling through the air with all his strength. We knew the moment the blade touched bark, the whole town did, though we were too far away to see properly. I'll never forget the sound that tree made as steel ate its way through its young flesh. To call it a scream would be underselling it. The high-pitched screech it made carried through the chill air, reverberating through our town and shaking the glass in our windows. We all cried out as one, in alarm, in terror, clapping our hands to our ears in an attempt to drown out that terrible, hideous noise. He returned shortly afterwards, the sapling chopped into short logs on his sled. Sap dripped onto the snow in his wake, strangely dark against the white, strangely red. We tried not to think too hard about it as the woodcutter allocated us each a log to burn, and as we gathered around our hearts that night the memory of that scream faded, to be replaced only with the warm comfort of fire. The woodcutter ventured back into the forest the next day. The sapling had lasted just the one night and the town needed more wood to burn. It was the middle of December with spring nowhere in sight. The town gathered at his door as he prepared to depart, some offering mumbled thanks and words of encouragement, others, like my family, begging him not to go back. He listened to us all but departed anyway. The town was freezing, he explained. He had no choice. The tree he selected this time was slightly deeper in, and thicker and taller for it. This time nobody watched him work, but we all knew once again when his axe had done its job. The scream. He returned later that afternoon, his sled piled even higher with wood than the day before. Again he left spatters of sap behind him as he dragged the tree through town. Children kicked fresh snow over the bright red droplets and families queued to claim their allocation of logs. That tree lasted 2 nights and then the woodcutter returned to the forest. I watched from my cottage's front window as he vanished into the darkness, dragging his empty sled behind him. We waited for the trees to scream, but nothing happened. The morning passed and the sun dipped lower in the sky and still there was no sound from the forest, no indication the woodcutter had felled the tree. We gathered at the edge of town, wrapped up tight against the cold, and stared out at the forest, waiting. Eventually the sun set and the moon began to rise in the sky, 1,000 distant stars twinkling above us as more snow began to fall, gently at first and then more thickly, driving us back into our homes. We wondered what the silence meant and why the woodcutter had not yet returned. My father offered that perhaps he had delved deeper into the forest in search of bigger trees that would last us the winter, not just a few days. Dark looks were exchanged at the thought of that. We all knew how the forest paths shifted and changed the deeper you delved. If the woodcutter had tried to plumb the very depths of the forest, it did not bear thinking about. We retired to our beds that night full of uncertainty and fear for the woodcutter and fear for ourselves. Our furniture had long since been burned. Even the straw from our mattresses had been sacrificed for just a little bit more warmth. It was when the moon was at its highest that we heard it. The town was asleep for the most part, but the noise roused us all from our frigid beds. We gathered in the town square, our eyes firmly planted on the dark shape of the forest as it crouched silhouetted against the night sky. We heard it again as we stood there, clutching each other's trembling fingers and staring wide-eyed into the darkness. A scream rang through the still night, and at first the town rejoiced to hear it. He must have found a good tree, we thought, smiling at each other and imagining all the fires we would light. Then, as the screaming dragged on, the smiles fell from our faces, one by one. Despair rippled among us as we each became aware of why this scream bothered us so. This was a scream unlike those we had become accustomed to. This scream was loud, ragged, deeper than the needle-sharp screeches the young trees had produced. Twice more we heard it that night, each scream more horrendous, more agonized than the one before it. Twice more we flinched and winced as the night was punctuated with the screams, with the voice, of the woodcutter. We returned sleeplessly to our homes that night, once the silence seemed to have returned for good. The next morning the woodcutter's sled was discovered at the edge of the forest, piled high with what appeared to be logs from a distance. The poor townsfolk who ventured out to examine it returned pale and hollow-eyed, dragging the sled behind them with sick determination. The sled dripped red as they pulled it through town, and within it dark shades were stacked, this one wearing a boot, that one a scrap of overcoat, while from the top protruded an axe, clutched tightly in the severed hand of the woodcutter. Thank you for listening to Night Whispers. If the shadows kept you company tonight, leave a comment. Tell me where in the world you're listening from. And if you're brave enough, like, subscribe, and come back next time. Just don't follow the voice in the trees.